I open this hearing of the Rural and Regional Affairs and Transport References Committee into the adequacy of Australia's biosecurity measures and response preparedness. Today we'll hear from a number of representatives of stakeholders involved in Australia's biosecurity preparedness and response. Today's hearing is a hybrid hearing with some senators appearing remotely. I thank all of the witnesses for appearing today. For the benefit of witnesses, especially those online, I am the Chair, Senator Matthew Canavan, and Senator Sterle, who's the Deputy Chair, is with us. Senator Ciccone, Senators White, Senator Colbeck are all here in Parliament House. I believe on teleconference we have Senators Whish-Wilson and Senators Rennick as well. Senators should note that if you are online and wish to make a question, just please get in touch with me directly to do so. These are public proceedings being broadcast live via the Parliament's website, and a Hansard transcript is being made. I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence. Witnesses also have a right to request to be heard in camera. Today we'll hear from a number of witnesses, including representatives of government agencies involved in Australia's biosecurity response. The Senate has resolved that an officer of a department of the Commonwealth or of a state shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officer to superior officers or to a minister. This resolution does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. If a witness objects to answering a question, they should state the ground upon which the objection is made, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer, having regard to the ground which is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request that the answer be given in camera. Commonwealth officers appearing today are also reminded of the Senate order specifying the process by which a claim of public interest immunity should be raised. A copy of the order is available from the Secretariat. I remind committee members and witnesses, if you're appearing by phone or video conference, please mute your microphones when you're not speaking. Thank you very much. I now welcome our first witnesses from Wool Producers Australia. Thank you very much for your submission and appearing today. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege has been provided to you. And for the Hansard record, could you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today? We might start with you, Ms Hall, in the room, and then go to those on the call.
Thanks, Senator. Jo Hall, CEO of Wool Producers Australia.
Thank you. And online, maybe Mr Story first.
Yeah, thanks, Senator. I hope you can hear me. Edward Story, I'm the President of Wool Producers Australia.
Loud and clear. And Mr Dawes.
Thanks, Senator. Adam Dawes, General Manager of Wool Producers Australia.
Thank you very much. Thanks again for your submission. You do have the opportunity to make an opening statement if you would like, and after that we'll go to questions.
Thank you. We will make an opening statement. Thanks. So good morning all, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. The Australian wool industry generates around $3 billion annually in raw wool exports alone, which would be shut down overnight if we were to have a serious emergency animal disease incursion, such as foot and mouth disease. The wool industry has a long and proud tradition in Australia, and while not as prominent as it once was, is still the backbone of many regional and remote communities and economies. Wool Producers Australia is the peak advocacy and policy body for wool growers. Our membership is comprised of the industry's commercial, superfine and stud breeding sectors. Wool Producers is nationally representative through our state farm organisation members and 3 democratically elected independent directors. Biosecurity and the arrangements under which they are managed in Australia are a major focus for wool producers, and we are committed to ensuring that industry, government and the general public play their part in protecting not just the agricultural sector, but Australia's environment and unique biodiversity. On matters relating to animal health and biosecurity, the Wool Producers Board receives advice from our extended Health and Welfare Advisory Committee that includes representatives from state farm organisations, the Australian Superfine Wool Growers Association, Merino Link, SRS Genetics and the Australian Stud Sheep Breeders Association, along with observers from the Australian Veterinary Association, Australian Wool Innovation and Animal Health Australia. This progressive representation network enables a truly collective voice on the Australian wool industry, who act on behalf of the wool industry, making recommendations on the expenditure of the Health and Welfare Levy administered by Animal Health Australia. Wool producers are also the wool industry signatory to the Emergency Animal Disease Response Agreement, known as EADRA, a role which we take very seriously. The EADRA is a unique contractual arrangement signed in 2002 that brings together the Commonwealth, state and territory governments and livestock industry groups to collectively and significantly increase Australia's capacity to prepare for and respond to an emergency animal disease incursion. The main benefit of the agreement is the ability to respond quickly and effectively to an EAD incident while minimising uncertainty over management and funding arrangements, which include government and industry cost-sharing EAD response activities. Not only are EADRA signatories such as wool producers responsible for decisions made on behalf of industry during a serious EAD incursion, but also for the preparedness activities during peacetime, which include policy decisions, training, surveillance, risk management and industry expertise in these activities. The recent increased level of attention in response to the presence of foot and mouth disease and lumpy skin disease in Indonesia has brought about processes within government and industry that have to some extent cast aside or duplicated long-established conventions embedded within EADRA. The apparent deviation from the EADRA framework are a concern to wool producers. In the spirit of shared responsibility, to which EADRA aligns perfectly, it is imperative that partners from all facets of the biosecurity system participate in established processes and procedures, as significant risks such as FMD are too big to simply make decisions on the run. We look forward to discussing these important issues with you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Hall. Can I go to the issue raised there about the ADRA, and you raised in your submission your determination to see the commitments under the ADRA be maintained. Could you just outline what you see as the risks that might not occur or has not been occurring if that's the case, and what would be the issue if that it wasn't being stuck to?
Sure. So, as mentioned in our submission and in that opening address, in recent times with the increased focus on biosecurity, given the increased threat posed by the FMD detection in Indonesia, we saw a lot of groups outside of the EADRA framework pop up. I guess that was stemming from a lack of leadership within the EADRA framework. So that just resulted in a lot of duplication of activities that have been agreed to under this framework, and that's why we are so keen to see the EADRA upheld and maintained and the conventions under which it operates.
Okay. I know that the ADRA was agreed to in 2002. Take me through, I mean, what has been the process since then? That's a long time ago. So has there been reviews, or is there a review, or has there been a review recently? And have other bodies been invited to join in that time, or is it still what it was in 2002?
So Animal Health Australia, as a custodian of the ADRA, holds, I think it's 5 yearly reviews, but I can take that on notice. So it is reviewed. The AusVet plans that sit underneath the EADRA, which are disease-specific responses or operation manuals, they are reviewed periodically as well. We're currently, it was a scheduled review of the foot and mouth disease manual. It wasn't just in response to the detection in May. So there's that that's been worked through over the last few months, and also things like valuation and compensation manual is currently being reviewed. So it is reviewed in a timely fashion, I guess, and the opportunity for new signatories to join is there from the livestock industries anyhow.
Okay. Can I just turn to the funding? In your submission, you talk about the need for sustainable funding arrangements. There's been a lot of focus on the proposal, I think, either in or from the Crake review for a levy. Before I get to the issue of a levy or anything, what do you think we need extra funding to go towards? Because I'm always, particularly if we're going to raise a tax or a levy, I want to really know, well, what does the money have to be spent on? Rather than just saying sustainable or the amount of money, what do we actually need investment in to better protect biosecurity in Australia?
Well, I guess, again, referring to the recent heightened activities in relation to foot and mouth disease surveillance, we've seen additional money poured into the federal government for pre and at border biosecurity activities, which, you know, is certainly very welcomed. What we would see as a benefit of having a sustainable funding mechanism is that those types of activities are funded continuously because we have a lot at stake here, rather than in an ad hoc and sometimes reactive manner. So it is the activities along the biosecurity continuum, whether, as I said, pre, at and in-country activities, both at a grassroots, state and federal level.
Is there anything in particular that you're worried about in terms of a vulnerability? As you say, there were some reactive changes made there to passengers coming through the airports, but what about freight or direct mail type business that's increasing? Is there anything in particular that you think is vulnerable that needs additional funding?
Look, I think certainly at a local level, what we used to see a lot from state governments was investment into extension activities around biosecurity, which were really useful. So we've seen that retraction in that expenditure and resources from the state government. So we would certainly like to see that type of thing. I might actually pass to our General Manager, Adam Dawes, because he might have some thoughts on this issue.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. So I think, Senators, it's a fine line to fall into the spirit in the intent of the National Biosecurity Strategy that speaks to a shared responsibility. There's some risk of starting to adapt the biosecurity system, that the shared responsibility starts to become almost a shifting responsibility. And I think as some of those responsibilities start to shift, it's important that resources and funding shift with those. So traditional mechanisms where governments can be funded in their biosecurity activities through taxes, levies and fee-for-service charges relating to the regulatory activities they undertake, that's fine for them. They've got a source of revenue to support those activities. But once we start to get those to shift to industry bodies and broader industry, there needs to be some capacity to enable the uplifting capacity so that can be sufficiently resourced.
Okay. I just want to turn to one more different topic, and then I'll hand over to, I think, Senator Ciccone. I'm going to the bit in your submission where you talk about a national traceability system, especially for sheep. We've had a bit of evidence and discussion about decisions to move to an individual, I think, tagging system, for want of a better word. I just want to drill down. In your submission, you say, and I'm just quoting here, I think it's on the last page of your submission, that while understanding the need for robust traceability to quickly trace animals in the event of an EAD incursion, it must be understood that the application of EIDs, that's electronic identification devices, without system improvements will not improve traceability. Could you just unpack that a little bit? Like, what are the system improvements that would be required to make an individualised tagging system work?
Sure. So obviously the application of individual electronic identification for the sheep industry, I won't refer to goats, it's not our remit.
Okay.
Sheep has been spoken about for a long time. We do have a paper-based, mob-based system in place for sheep currently, and that's been in place since 2006. And subsequent reviews have shown that we haven't met the national traceability performance standards under that mob-based system. So there has been a lot of talk and a lot of, and I guess our concern was that when the ministers met through the Australian Agricultural Ministers Forum on the 20th of July and made this announcement that individual tagging or tags would be applied, it didn't actually speak about the systems reforms, because what our policy is quite clear in what we see in developing a robust system, which is the database for a multi-species database with the capacity to trace farmed FMD animals. We need equitable cost sharing between industry and government and along the supply chain. And we also need to see harmonised approach, because unless we have those systems, the underpinning systems such as states and jurisdictions talking to each other, this central database that can track all movements nationally, putting an expensive, or what some might consider an expensive tag, particularly in comparison to the current tags that are applied now, is not going to increase traceability at all. We need to have those underpinning systems agreed to before we go and say, put an electronic tag in, because it just won't achieve anything.
So do you have concerns with the existing, is it right to say, is this the NLIS database, or that doesn't cover?
Yes.
That even though you're not, sheep aren't on an individual tag basis, they're
There's-
still in the NLIS database.
There's still
It's the
mob-based
same-
movements
it's the
recorded
same-
on the database.
Same
yeah.
database, except
Yes.
just different types of data compared to cattle.
Yep.
So do you have concerns of, is it right to say the integrity or the scalability of the existing database? And if so, what sort of needs to happen to improve that?
I guess when we're looking at the database, it is scalability and the capacity to handle the increased numbers that will be that will be recorded, moving from a mob base to a
Right, okay.
individual. Because we're talking, I think the sheep population in Australia is nearing 70 million.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
it's quite a large increase in volume of.
So this is, just to be clear, it's not necessarily the issue of, in the event of an outbreak, that obviously be a lot more stress put on the traceability system, as we saw during COVID. The issue is just simply the sort of lines in the database, so to speak, will grow exponentially once you include sheep. That's the concern, is it?
Yeah, and the ability for the data from individual jurisdictions going into that national or singular database as well, which will be essential during an EAD incursion, so that tracing, because we trade as a nation, it's no good if the data from one state isn't compatible with data
Yeah.
with other states. So
Okay.
we need that harmonisation in data, but also in standards. Yeah. I might ask Adam if he has anything further to add on that.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I think just to add to that, it comes back to the shared responsibility where producers have a role to play, and the regulatory impost upon them would be the cost associated with applying electronic tags to sheep and the related reading equipment to input that data into the system. The next part is the regulatory role that the individual states play that feed into a national system. And if we get a breakdown of any one of those components, we don't have a truly national system to deliver on our EAD response needs and also our market access requirements. So it's really one that I think aligns with that shared responsibility, and it's not fair to impose a regulatory burden and cost upon producers if the system doesn't support delivery of the benefits that result from that cost that producers incur.
Fair enough. Okay.
Just on that.
Yeah, okay. Senator Colbeck has a question on this,
Just
and then
one
I'll go to
question.
Senator Ciccone.
Do you have any sense of the scale of movement across jurisdictional borders within the country? And you might want to take that on notice, but there's a lot of animals move in and out of states across state borders, and that would give some sense of what we're talking about here when you combine it with the scaling up from mob to individual.
Senator, we certainly don't have those figures. I think there'd be other more appropriate bodies to ask, but we're happy to take that on notice and come back to you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Senator
Thanks,
Ciccone.
Chair. Good morning, Mr. Paul. I guess sort of follows on from what the Chair was asking earlier. I guess my follow-up question is, what do you see as the role of industry bodies in sort of changing that on-farm behaviour, but also helping farmers change their behaviour towards issues like FMD or other diseases that might come to this country? Because I think where we're going with these line of questioning, it seems like even though there are systems in place, are they really effective systems? If there was to be an outbreak, would we be able to quickly shut down, isolate, be able to identify certain farms that might have FMD, for instance? And how would we quickly prepare? And I think this has been some of the line of question we had in Rockhampton too, where some of the farmers we spoke to there had started developing their own systems, in traceability systems that is, about how we tackle these issues should there be ever an outbreak in this country.
Thanks, Senator. Look, as part of the traceability discussion and the reference in our submission, there's the broader, and what we're very keen to see is that traceability reform, which is a priority for both us and the federal government at the moment, not just for the sheep industry, but traceability in general. So, in terms of what is appropriate, whatever we have in place, if the worst happens, it won't be enough. So we're on a journey of continuous improvements in terms of being able to, trace product, or whether that's wool, whether that's the animal. So we're working on it, and we're committed to seeing that traceability reform so that we can try and trace animals and product in the quickest way possible.
The individual electronic tags, the ID tags, why do you think it's taken so long for us to get to this stage for sheep? But also, do you say that as benefits about trying to incorporate that data into that traceability should there be an outbreak of FMD?
So why it's taken so long, I think, is, sheep and cattle and their movements are quite different, and we know that the cattle industry has had individual identification for a long time. Sheep, the sheer numbers of sheep in Australia, and the fact that it was based on a mob-based, or predicated on a mob-based system, it's been in place since 2006. So it's we've got that system embedded, we've reviewed it, we've seen that it's not quite meeting the National Traceability Performance Standards. So I think why there has been resistance, and I'll speak for the producer level, is that there's concern about the additional cost required for electronic tagging, as opposed to the current tags that might be 30 cents. Electronic tags, we're looking at a minimum $2 per tag.
I guess the other side of the argument would be, well, yes, you might have to pay more, but there is the benefit knowing that should there be an outbreak, that the government, the industry can quickly come in and actually ensure that the disease at the time might be isolated.
I think that is certainly the messaging that is being, relayed at the moment, and I think producers can see the benefits in that. Obviously the detection of FMD in Indonesia and then more closely in Bali has really put the livestock industry on notice, and I think when the announcement was made by the AAM in July, whilst we haven't got into the details of how that system is going to be unfolded, how it's going to unfold, the level of pushback from producers, even at this early stage, has been fairly minimal, really. I might have expected more. So I think there is an acceptance now, because people probably understand the necessity to trace animals and identify animals quickly, with the end goal of stamping out a major EAD as quick as possible to return to trade.
Yeah, and I guess the other discussion that we had too with some of the producers in Rocky too was even from a consumer level too, understanding where the produce has come from too, but that's a discussion for another day. I know your submission, a very good submission to the committee, talks about the biosecurity funding system. The one thing I just wanted to ask though, were there any, or have you considered any other options outside of, I guess, what government has already produced in terms of other reports in recent times that you might want to share with us today?
To be honest, Senator, no.
No?
No, looking at the proposal of levies, yeah.
Okay. All right. Look, Chair, I think I might leave my my line of
Senator,
questioning there. Oh, we got. Hang
Sorry,
on.
does
Mr.
Ed-
Story.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yes, Senator, if it's okay if I talk?
Yeah, sure. Go for it, mate.
My apologies, I can't see, and my apologies for not being there in person today. I caught up in another meeting. An example of why that's needed, I think during the recent heightened activity, we saw a number of people from various sectors of, for example, the Department of Agriculture, seconded on short-term work to review things, to look at processes, to, be involved in upgrades, of short-term arrangements in respect to their role in the federal government. That they should, so therefore I imagine there's a bunch of other work that's not being done. That shouldn't have to second people from other areas at short notice and quickly get them up to speed. Those resources should be available. This is imperative for the national economy, that our biosecurity practices at our border are first class. And therefore, and then your question about industry bodies and what we need to do, then following from that, we need to continue. It's a process of continual education and extension work, but I think that, and it perhaps refers to an earlier comment from the Chair, that, what would funding be for across industry, across government, at the federal government and industry, and then states, but that's a matter of them. We saw during COVID some different interpretation of how things are run. The reality is, if we discover foot and mouth in this country, it's probably been here, I think the evidence tells us 20 to 40 days by the time we find it. The sheep movements are large, in the millions across state borders on an annual basis, but we need to get that down. The resources required will be enormous, and we don't for 1 minute think they need to be on hand at all times, but those people that run that and coordinate that from the across federal government, state government and industry need to have the correct resources to get the correct level of preparedness and response activities in place, not be chasing our tail once we get one here. That would be my comment on that matter. Thank you very much.
That's right. Can I just follow up on that, Chair? So in terms of the state, Commonwealth responsibilities, I mean, how do you see that the states are playing in terms of their responsibilities? Because some of the feedback that we've received is that the Commonwealth can only do so much at the border, but once it does get here in country, should diseases like FMD get here, how confident are you that the various state governments have strong systems in place to deal with potential diseases?
Senator, I think they've got strong systems, but as we saw during COVID, there's probably different resourcing levels. For example, in New South Wales, we have Local Land Services, which is a government industry partnership, which probably has upwards of 100 people that could be quickly, operate as biosecurity officers, and in effect do now operate day one. Other states have good back systems in place, but don't necessarily have the resources. So I think it's a mixed bag, would be a fair comment to say, about the levels of commitment and capacity in each state.
No, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Senator Ciccone. I've got a couple more questions, if there's no others. I wanted to just clarify the situation for wool in regards to if there were an outbreak and market access. There's probably, we have probably received more evidence on the issue with red meat, if you like. And I note your submission you would have, or we expect to have markets close if the worst were to happen. What exactly happens though in that regard? Is it kind of treated is raw wool treated the same as a cow effectively, or a sheep, or are there some distinct differences between how red meat would be affected compared to wool and market access?
So wool, as an animal product, will be, from an FMD susceptible animal, will very potentially be subjective to movement restrictions as well. So we had the livestock standstill that will be invoked. Whilst that is specific to livestock, general discussions and belief held, or positions held by state governments, also mean that they will probably stop animal products.
Any wool,
too.
so wool
be
will stand
part of
still
that,
if
yes.
it's already off the
Yep.
sheep, so to speak. Yep.
And as a very export-focused industry where we export around 98% of our product, we are incredibly exposed if we lose access to markets, international markets. Yep.
What about the supply chain here? So where does a wool product become or start? Well, how does it? It starts obviously as an animal product that's from an FMD, if it's susceptible FMD animal, it won't be allowed into a country or moved. What process needs to be done to that wool before it would get it's okay now? Like if it's scoured or somewhat transformed, does it then become eligible for export?
So there's a couple of different pathways. One is the product can be treated with a spray, and it can also be subjected to time and temperature,
like an irrigation
sort of formula
sort of thing?
to deactivate it.
Right.
But then when we're talking about the processing or early stage processing of wool, it's at that point of scouring. And at that point, which Australia has very limited capacity of at the moment, but it's at that point that the animal byproduct becomes a fibre, so it should be open to exporting. So that's wool producers were the recipient of an Australian Trade and Market Access Cooperative grant to look at domestic and diversified processing. So that report will be released early November. So,
As you say, there's very limited wool scouring in Australia, isn't there? Do you have a percentage figure? I mean, how much of our wool could be scoured in any one year through our existing processing facilities?
I might hand to Adam or Ed on that. I should know that one, but the figure.
Well, you could
has
take it on notice if you like. It's a detailed figure if you could take on notice. In terms of the
It's
former,
not large.
I don't think it's much. We've lost a lot. And I'm aware, congratulate your efforts in trying to rectify that situation. But on that former, you raised the issue I wasn't aware of. That there is a treatment that could potentially make it exportable. Is that relatively cheap, or are there plans to, if in the event of an outbreak, to ramp up such abilities to treat wool so we can continue to export and provide income to graziers?
Look, again, if we look at what the recent outbreak of foot and mouth disease in South Africa, well, there's two recent outbreaks, one in 2019, one in this year. Following the 2019 outbreak, the South African industry went to pretty considerable expense to heat their wool stores, so that, because again, the virus can be inactivated through time and temperature, wool held at for a certain period of time at a certain temperature deactivates it. So we can look at doing that. In terms of the the treatment of the spray, I don't really know if it's, again, I might refer to Adam Dawes on that one, who might have a better understanding.
Those treatments recognised.
Yeah, thanks, Joe.
can
And it is, in terms of practicality, we're liaising actively with our South African counterparts on their time temperature storage protocol, and where wool producers are leading an initiative with the International Wool Textile Organisation to develop a global standard for wool exporting countries to store wool in accordance with that temperature time. And we've now commenced actively liaising with our Federal Department of Agriculture to make sure that that protocol would be something that would be able to be used by our government to certify exported greasy wool. In terms of the sprays, it's not currently applied within the global supply chain, and far more work would be required before that would be an option. So, given the heightened level of risk that we're facing in relation to foot and mouth disease, we're very much learning lessons from our South African colleagues and appreciate the openness that they have with us in wanting to contribute to protecting the global wool supply chain.
Senator Colbeck?
So I think you've answered the question I was going to ask, which is the acceptance of those various treatments in global markets, and it sounds as though it's a work in progress at this point in time. So, for example, until the protocols are properly understood, designed and perhaps certified, you wouldn't be saying to our government you can bring treated wool into Australia from South Africa at the moment.
No, and I think, Senator, with respect, that would be a question perhaps better placed to the department, because the acceptance of trade protocols are subject to government negotiations. The efforts we're undertaking is to develop an industry-level standard upon which those negotiations can commence.
Okay. So a work in progress still.
Yeah.
Final question from me. Is there any work being done with Australian Wool Innovation on this issue in terms of building this capability in Australia?
So, Senator, Wool Producers has what we call the Wool Industry Post-Farm Gate Emergency Animal Disease Working Group, of which Australian Wool Innovation is a member. So we work on various issues with them. This specific issue, they're certainly part of discussions and have been supportive in that role. So, yep.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting. Thank you very much. If there are no further questions from senators, we again very much thank you for your submission and your time here today to you all. I think there has been a couple of questions taken on notice, and we're asking if you could give those back to us by Tuesday, the 1st of November, 2022. Thank you very much. We'll move on to our next witnesses, who I think might be in the room. So, I would welcome representatives from Australian Pork Limited to the front. Do we have, everyone's here, but no one on the teleconference? Oh, just one. Okay, right. Too far. Good morning. Hello, thank you, Ms. Andre. Is that Andre, that's right. Great. Thank you and welcome you again formally. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, could you please state your name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Margot Andre, and Chief Executive Officer of Australian Pork Limited.
Great. You're welcome to make an opening statement if you have one, and then we'll go to questions.
Wonderful, thank you, Senator. All right, so good morning all. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today on behalf of our 4,000 Australian pork producers and our sector's 36,000 employees and all the families deriving their livelihoods from our $5.3 billion industry. Australian Pork Limited is unique in terms of livestock industry representation. We are a producer-owned organisation and we promote sustainable growth across the Australian pork industry's entire supply chain by overseeing integrated marketing, research and innovation and policy initiatives for the whole industry, so one voice. Our progressive model means that we sit both at the R&D and the representation tables, and we truly are that one voice for industry. We welcome the opportunity today to discuss the adequacies of Australia's biosecurity measures and response preparedness, in particular with respect to foot and mouth disease. Australia's biosecurity system is fundamental to the prosperity of all Australians, and sustainable and strategically aligned investment into this system not only safeguards our economy and the industries that power it, but our complex fabric of environmental, cultural and social assets that define us as Australians. In an increasingly complex global environment marked by the growth of international trade and travel, biosecurity outbreaks across human, agriculture, environment and marine health continue to rise in speed, volume and complexity. This trend is compounded by changing climate and biodiversity loss, which may increasingly affect the range, habitat, spread and impact of invasive species, both known and yet to be identified. As an island nation, Australia has maintained a favourable biosecurity status that supports our reputation as a provider of high quality and safe agriculture commodities and has driven the value of production from agriculture to $82 billion as of September 2022. The importance of maintaining a robust biosecurity system to support and protect our enviable reputation has led to the development of a complex, multi-layered approach that spans all levels of government and the agriculture sector. This system also provides the additional benefits of safeguarding against endemic diseases, pests and weeds, all of which adversely impact agricultural productivity and profitability and degrade Australia's unique flora and fauna. Australian pork producers are only too aware of the heightened risk facing the combined threats of African swine fever, COVID-19 and Japanese encephalitis virus and now foot and mouth disease. This has all been over the past 3 years. While Australia currently remains ASF and FMD free, the ability of these diseases to destroy the livelihoods of Australian pork producers and the rural communities they support cannot be overstated. A study commissioned by Australian Pork Limited in 2019 estimates an incursion of African swine fever would cost the economy approximately $2 billion if established in Australia, while ABARES estimates the economic impact of the multi-state incursion of foot and mouth disease to be $80 billion over 10 years. Outside the pork industry, the increasing threat of exotic disease incursions and requirements for stronger biosecurity has also been noted in the growing number of independent biosecurity reviews and exercises aimed at testing and enhancing the emergency animal disease preparedness and response arrangements. While our biosecurity system has historically protected us, the message is clear. The Australian biosecurity system is at risk of no longer being fit for purpose to protect our industries. The pressure on this vital system and the need for urgent reform has reached a critical tipping point. The growing calls from across industry, government and increasingly from community to safeguard Australia's biosecurity system must be addressed using a coordinated, collaborative, innovative and sustainably funded approach. The recent release of the National Biosecurity Strategy presents an ideal mechanism to drive this approach. For the strategy to be successful, an implementation plan supported by sustainable funding and governance arrangements is now required. It must also be given the authority to respond to a significant number of recommendations outlined in key reviews and exercises. The challenge and unique opportunity for the National Biosecurity Strategy is delivery of genuine cultural change that facilitates a once-in-a-lifetime, one biosecurity approach to future-proof Australia. Achieving this ambition will not only require a genuine partnership approach between all stakeholders identified in this strategy, but expansion to incorporate other key sectors, including health, regional development and infrastructure, community services and tourism. There's never been a better time for genuine biosecurity leadership and reform, and we look forward to being part of that change that will safeguard our country for all Australians. And happy to take any questions, Senator.
Thank you very much, Ms Andrew. I just want to start with something that's not quite in your submission, and I'm not exactly sure how much you might have oversight or it's an issue, but I often read that one of the biggest risks of FMD coming into the country is through perhaps illegal or not best practice swill feeding practices. So I think that is the feeding of scraps and food to pigs. Is that something that's a risk in the industry, so to speak, or is this more sort of backyard people feeding a couple of pigs they've got, which you might not cover or might not be members of your organisation, if you know what I mean?
And I do know what you mean,
Yeah.
and you're exactly right. So swill feeding is the feeding of meat products to animals. So your vegetables, it's just you can't scrape your plate off into your backyard pigs.
Yep.
It needs to be very clear. And the issue we have is that if you have a look at the importation that they've been able to pull up at the border, there's been over 42 tonnes of illegal pork products coming in a 6-month period. So that have had traces of FMD and African swine fever. So you're exactly right. The industry itself is very well protected. It is the issues of feral pigs and those small backyarders who, might just scrape that plate off. So it's a real risk, and it's one that we've been putting a lot of work on, and we've even been working with restaurants to say, don't just scrape those plates. You actually have to separate if you want to be part of that food wastage overhaul as well.
Okay.
It's a
So you're
confusing
confident
message,
in
Senator.
the industry that this is an illegal practice
Yeah.
and it's not done. Everybody in your industry understands their obligations.
Exactly. Yep. Any professional commercial pig
Yep.
operator would not swill feed their animals. We don't even allow ham sandwiches on our properties. So
Right,
workers
okay.
can't bring a ham sandwich from home
Right.
just in case.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So I noted in the Matthews review, which was some time ago now, I think over 10 years ago, they did point out that the prohibitions in their view on swill feeding were inconsistent and not necessarily strong enough across the state governments. What do you have a view at the moment on those, on the laws around swill feeding? Are they effective?
Yeah, look, the bottom line is that we're actually asking the general public to make the change. So we do have strong rules and guidelines in place. We do ask for consistency across the states and territories. We do probably shout that quite loudly. That would be fantastic if they were all consistent and they all worked together. But it's about the general public actually understanding the risk of that simple act that we're probably working the most on.
Well, I think it's very important because, as you probably have seen in the last few months, there's an inordinate amount of focus on passengers coming back from, say, Bali, but very little seemingly focus on this issue. And so would you agree that this is one of the bigger risk factors for FMD coming into the country, the swill feeding to pigs?
It is one of the risk factors, absolutely. So, and we're just going to be proactive and try and get that message out to the general public.
Okay, thanks. And look, just turning to a submission now. I noted your submission on, I think it's a recommendation, it's certainly in a list of numbered points in number 5 on page 16 of your submission. You talk about enhanced response capabilities through EAD simulation exercises. That's something that's come up for discussion the last few days in our hearings. In fact, New South Wales DPI yesterday were conducting simulation exercise that which they stepped out of very kindly to appear at our hearing. So obviously this is going on, but you think more could be done, do you, in terms of simulations? And are you involved? How much is the industry involved in these simulation exercises that governments do?
Yeah, so I guess probably I'll start with I'm really proud of the pork industry and the way they've been working in the last 3 years, because whilst FMD's on the doorstep now and there's been a lot of reaction,
Yep.
this has actually been our life for 3 years,
Yeah.
and FMB has been one of the diseases. What we learnt through a lot of these exercises is that there was a lot of decisions being made in isolation of the industries. For us in particular, there was because I guess if you look at the state-based
Just
system...
to be clear, these exercises you're talking about, you were doing these with state governments?
With
or
state governments,
Yep,
so state
okay.
government, federal government.
federal, right,
So
okay.
we've been working really closely with state and federal governments for that 3-year period.
Yep.
And what kept coming to light is that for the decades prior, we'd actually probably been working in isolation.
Right.
So a lot of the changes we've been making through those exercises is to get industry people at the table with the expertise and the technical knowledge to help the government. When you think those state governments and federal governments deal with, 115 different industries across agriculture, knowing the intimate details of the pork industry was not front of mind. So working with them to make sure that's available. And I need to be really clear, I think what we've learnt in the last 3 years could be rolled out to any of the other industries as well, making sure they've got industry liaison officers at the table, making sure that they're working together. But again, it comes back to when you have front of mind and you've got the pressures of your own rules and guidelines and legislation and what industry actually needs to keep running and the commercials and the speed of it, we just have to do more work and work collaboratively. And in the best time, it's a unique opportunity to do it in preparing for disease as opposed to responding to
Absolutely.
a disease.
Yep, absolutely.
So, but yeah, that's actually probably what I would summarise it as. We'd like the state governments to get to know those industries so that in the event of a disease outbreak, they know who to talk to, they know what's involved. And the ADRA system, the Emergency Animal Disease Response Arrangements, have that in place and can be rolled out very quickly. What we saw with Japanese encephalitis virus, though, is that the ADRA disease plan wasn't used. It wasn't activated. So all of us live and breathe the ADRA, but because of the way Japanese encephalitis virus was a communicable disease, it got taken over by the Department of Health with the support of AG.
Yep.
EADRA wasn't actually called. So we were sort of left a little bit of, well, what do? We still followed the framework of EADRA.
Well, I think you make a good point about the need for that human contact. The plan's great, but it was written 20 years ago, and there's a need, obviously, for people to understand who's who in the zoo, so to speak. So they're, I think, very useful. Just finally from me, what's the situation of traceability in the pork industry? Obviously, you've got a individualised tagging system in the cattle industry. It's rolling out to sheep. What's the situation with a pig? Can we understand where pigs go, and is there a database of traceability for that? So
we've done an awful lot of work, particularly in the last few years as well. And you'd be very pleased to know we're a mob-based system, tattooing. So, but our traceability is to the point now that from traceability from farm to endpoint with a closure of it's about 48 hours at the most, and now we've actually moved utilising data to have a real-time traceability. So not only do we have traction of people coming onto the farms through the data system, we're now actually working with the transport companies so that at any point in time we can track those pigs, and then our pig pass system is almost to a real-time traceability. So we have a 98% closure rate on all of our systems within that 48-hour period, but we're actually moving to a real-time system. So, dare I say it, we're leaders in the traceability system.
But there's no moves to go to individual base?
Individual tagging?
The mob-based system works
No,
well.
Senator, and this is one of those cases where we've come back to the basics of our animals, and our animals are really beautiful, curious creatures, but they like to eat things, and they like to eat tags and things like that. So to move to a tagging system is actually not a solution. And we don't need to. Our pigs aren't out in paddocks. They're not roaming over hundreds of kilometres. They're in a mob-based system. So we only really use a tagging system to monitor some of the sows and the health. But, yep, they do like to eat little things, so...
Yes, they do. All right, I'll go to Senator Ciccone.
Thank you, Chair, and I think you'd actually asked the very question I was about to ask about traceability, but just intrigued on that system. If there was to be an outbreak, so from what you said earlier about the states, how confident are you that the various state governments are adequately resourced to assist your industry should there be an FMD outbreak or other outbreaks?
Look, Senator, I do have to give a shout out to the states because they have worked very closely with us on African swine fever and Japanese encephalitis virus. But the reality is we were lucky that we were the only industry impacted at that time. They do probably need some more resources. They need some more support. We do say biosecurity is one of the number one priorities for them. But there's also things that they've been learning around a stock standstill and things like that is not practical. You cannot stand the national pork industry down for 30 days because we are a constant supply 10-month rolling system. And if you go longer than about 2 weeks of keeping pigs on farm, then you start to get into animal welfare issues. It's not how the industry works. So we've done a lot of work with them around how we keep the industry moving. But I do believe that it would be great to see some more support for the chief veterinary officers in the states so that they can do what they need to do in the time frame they need to do, but making sure they're working with everybody.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I appreciate the very comprehensive submission as well too.
Thank you.
So I want to ask about the role of, the industry and various, players in the industry about how we change and promote change on farms. As you mentioned earlier too, even whether we, how we feed our pigs as well too, informing consumers. It's fair to say it's not just a producer's problem. I think everyone has a role to play. How do you see the industry being able to promote, on-farm change behaviour and also advising consumers on how to change their behaviour as well?
Yeah. So from an industry perspective, the committee might be pleased to know that under our quality assurance system, which is called APIC, we represent over 89% of production. And of those, everyone who's in that system has to have an on-farm biosecurity practice, and that's an independently audited system. So you cannot be part of the QA system in Australia in the pig industry without having that biosecurity plan in place that details that contingency plan and now goes to mosquito plans and things like that. So that's currently 89% of the industry has an on-farm biosecurity plan. And then, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of working with companies like Exoflare, we now are utilising data to make sure we're minimising risk coming on farm of people. We're also now working with the transport companies to minimise risk on the routes to slaughter, where those pigs are moving to and things like that. So from an on-farm perspective, again, I've got to give a shout out to the industry because they've actually taken it upon themselves to be very proactive and responsive in this area. But in terms of the consumers, so that's a really good one. So we're actually about to undertake, one of our priorities at Australian Pork is the Telling Our Story campaign, because what we want to actually do is reframe the Australian pork industry in the eyes of the consumer so that they're actually proud of it and they understand where we fit in the food security. 90% of our production is for Australia. We're not reliant on export, so we are here to feed Australians. So we want Australians to actually be proud of the industry and to know that we're doing our part to keep feeding
some of the
safe
evidence that we
protein.
heard in Rockhampton too, with the red meat folks and cattle being able to implement their own traceability system so that the consumer understands where that product that they're consuming has come from. And I think the example that was used around the wine industry, making the comparisons there between what we understand when we buy a bottle of wine, where that's come from, and the investment that company's put into that particular product.
Yeah.
But we don't seem to have that same sort of connection to red meat, and I guess in some ways probably pork as well.
Yeah.
But being able to understand, well, this pork's come from a particular farm. From your fork. Sorry?
Get some pork on your fork.
Pork on your fork, yeah. But I guess my follow-up question is, are
Thank
we
you,
looking
Senator.
at using that system, thanks Glenn, to also better understand and help the consumer understand where the products come from and to grow the industry as well?
Yeah, so two parts there. As we are a smaller, well-connected industry, we will tell the story about the pork, and that really is how we raise our animals. We launched our virtual tour this year of really explaining the pork industry, of what we do, but most importantly, why we do it. We've obviously done the Get Some Pork on Your Fork campaign around understanding the versatility of pork, but also the fabulous nutritious nature of the pork. And then from an environmental perspective, we're really telling that story on behalf of the industry around the fact we have reduced our carbon emissions by 70%. We've reduced our water by 80%. We're actually part of the renewable energy. We've got parts of our farms that are actually off-grid completely. But in terms of the individual businesses as well, they are then now telling that story of where their individual products come from, no matter which production system they go to. So again, we're probably, because of this nature of our industry, we're doing it A, as an industry perspective, and B, individual commercial entities are actually telling their story as well. And it's exactly what you describe. It's the lava products and things like that of the QA, scan the code, this is where the product comes from. So it's a two-pronged approach to really telling that story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Senator Ciccone. I've just got a couple of extra actually, Senator Sterle had a question,
thanks,
sorry. And then,
Andrew, I don't want to put your words in your mouth, but listening to your opening statement, I detected a fair bit of, frustration, I think, and please you'll be able to answer, where I picked up, and I'm very mindful of the swine flu problem because I was in China with Senator McDonald 3 years ago, when it was screaming out, look out, it could head here.
Yep.
And I know you're $5 billion of an $80 billion greater food market that's just as damn important for those of us that like pork and, of course, the people that are engaged and employed in it.
And bacon.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I'm wrong, but I also think I picked up that there's plenty of reports, there's plenty of recommendations, there's no more talk. I picked up that you are actually saying on behalf of your industry, now's the time for action, because I sense that there hasn't been a lot of action around your concerns. Am I missed the point there? Or
No,
am I
you're
getting
spot on.
close?
So that's exactly what we're asking for. There has been a lot of long-term independent reviews have been done. They have highlighted recommendations and we feel like they're sitting on the shelf. But then in terms of that, we've made do with the system that's in place at the moment, but we have been having this discussion around sustainable funding, consistency across the states, national approach of pushing back the border for far too long. And what we're actually saying is that the threats from biosecurity are on a whole new level. The speed, the complexity they're coming through. We have now the biosecurity strategy. Let's not let it be another document that sits on the shelf. Let's not throw things out. Let's actually fix the system, fund it properly, and work together. Biosecurity is not something we should take lightly, or we won't have food. We've got to think about it. It's not just about our industries, it's food security, and we've already lost an awful lot of manufacturing in this country. We need to really support our agriculture systems, and the best way to do that is to make sure we have a strong, well-funded biosecurity system that actually brings people together, collaborates, and stops the worries of, if there is an outbreak, everybody running off and doing their own thing.
Well, I think that powerful response is enough to shut me up. Thank you, Ms. Andrew.
Thank you, Senator Sterle. I've just got one or two quick questions, depending on how it goes. Again, I realise feral pigs would not be in your bailiwick.
No, it is, Senator.
It is? Oh,
It
okay.
is, yes.
Right, okay. But they're not, are they harvested for any commercial purposes? Or,
No,
But
so-
how do they come under
So,
your...
Senator, when I first took over and feral pigs were the issue on African swine fever, we realised no one looked after it.
Okay.
So we yelled really loudly. So we
Right.
actually have the National Feral Pig Program.
Okay.
So we've been working really hard for the last couple of years with a lot of the groups, particularly in Northern Australia and the Indigenous ranges and things like that, and have been working on reduction numbers. How do we
Eradication
suppress?
programs.
We actually have to suppress 70% of the numbers every year to really tackle feral pigs. There is an export market still. It's only little now.
Oh, okay.
About $1.2 billion last year. It used to be about 15 million, but the regulations have changed so much that it's just too hard to have a really strong export
All right, so what
industry.
needs to be done to get to that 70? Presumably we're not eradicating 70% at the moment. There still seem to be lots of them. So
We don't even
what
know how many there are, Senator.
Yeah, of course. What do we need to do? What needs to happen to hit that target?
Well, big shout out. I'd like the program funded further. It's only
Right.
funded till June 2023, so
Okay.
having that program funded more. We've been taking the approach.
Just for our what program is that
So
exactly?
the National Feral Pig Coordinator Program.
Okay,
And
and how
then
much
we've-
money is that?
It was 1.4 million over 3 years.
All right,
We'd
okay.
love that refunded. But what we've actually been doing, Senator, is actually working direct with landholders and getting them to work together, and then giving them things like the baiting, the culling and all of that, and working together. But we just need to be able to expand that and work with all of those landholders to give them the plans and the tools they need, because fine if 10 landholders do it, but if the one in the middle is not doing it,
That's right, yeah.
it's a waste of time. So we just have to keep getting that message of they are a pest. They're damaging not only our natural assets, our environment, they're a threat for all these diseases. So we just need to keep doing what we're doing. Be great to put it up on steroids, because I
Okay.
don't want to be sitting here in 5 years going, wish I had of.
Good. Okay, that's very, very useful for us. Glad I asked. And just finally, there's a bit of discussion about that. And when I read the AusVet plan, there's sometimes a minimisation of the threat of feral pigs. It's the idea that they don't go far from water points and therefore unlikely to be spreaders of diseases like foot and mouth disease. Do you have a particular perspective on that? What
I
should
do.
be our response to feral pigs in the event of an
So
outbreak?
for African swine fever, feral pigs are a huge risk, because really to tackle them, you can't just shoot and leave, because the disease
right,
stays within
okay.
the pigs.
Yep.
So you're looking at a shoot and collect or a bait and
very,
collect, which is, I don't know how you would
Almost
even do
impossible,
that.
yeah,
It would be
yeah.
impossible. You
Northern
would be,
Australia,
dare I say it, calling military in to help. Like, it just is
Yep.
on a scale that's scary. For FMD though, you're actually right. It's not as high a risk for feral pigs around the FMD. So the biggest risk there is, dare I say it, activists and things like that bringing something in, breaking the law. As you said, the products coming in through the mail, again, illegally. Like, seriously, people, we need to get the general public to stop this. It's not okay. So for FMD,
Okay.
feral pigs are a minimal risk, but for African swine fever and other diseases that move like that stay in the product, it's a huge risk. So I know we're focusing on FMD today, but for us, African swine fever,
Our inquiry's on everything.
scary.
That's a very
Yeah.
good point that you've
Yeah.
made, and especially around the need to continue those eradication efforts.
And surveillance and diagnostics. I can't be... We have the most amazing data and access to data in this country and globally. We should know where these diseases are. We should have known Japanese encephalitis was moving down. It came in on a cyclone. I understand we couldn't stop a cyclone, but we had no warning. And in fact, it was in 4 states, and the only reason we knew Japanese encephalitis was in Australia was because of our pigs as an early warning system. Then we understood that it actually impacted humans. So, but if we can do exactly what we're doing, like the fact that FMD is on our doorstep and we weren't all alerted to it as it was moving down, we need the people who actually are responsible for the surveillance and the data to be making sure they're communicating that with us, so we know. We can prepare. It's easier than responding.
Well, thank you very much for that. It's been very useful
You're welcome.
evidence for us, Ms. Andre. Thank you again for your submission and your time here this morning.
Excellent. And thank you all, and I hope you can
problems.
enjoy
I-
some beautiful pork.
Senator Sterl mentioned bacon. It got me hungry.
Actually, can I say 80% of your ham and bacon in Australia is imported?
Yes.
So make sure you read the label,
Well, I
look for the
do.
bar chart.
I was actually also talking to Senator Sterl the other day. I do like the fact that is labelled at our supermarkets, but
Yeah,
we
we
need
just
that
need
on
to take more
seafood
of
as
it.
well. And I don't know if you took any questions on notice, but if you have, please could you return those by the 1st of November 2022?
Excellent.
And thank you again.
And thank you all for taking biosecurity seriously.
No problems. Thank
Beautiful.
you. And we now welcome representatives from Animal Health Australia, who I think are here. Move straight on. Thank you. And I might just check, is Senator Wish-Wilson, are you on the line?
I am indeed, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, let me know. Well, I might just ask you, have you got questions for this?
I've just got some questions about the interaction with this agency and the FIP renewal baiting program.
Okay,
in
well,
New
we'll
South Wales.
definitely make sure we come to you. We're still getting set here. There we go, the experience.
You're going to know how to drive the
Well, good morning, Dr. Allen and Ms. Plowman. Formally welcome Animal Health Australia. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, could you please state your names and the capacity in which you appear today?
Kathleen Plowman, CEO of Animal Health Australia.
Thank you.
And Samantha Allen, General Manager of Emergency Preparedness at Animal Health Australia.
Thank you both. Thank you very much for your submission, and you're welcome to make some opening remarks, and then we'll go to questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Senators, and I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to contribute to this inquiry. As you know, our biosecurity system is facing unprecedented challenges, and these challenges are evidenced with Japanese encephalitis outbreak in February this year, and the threat of lumpy skin disease, African swine fever, and foot-and-mouth disease in our near neighbours. However, these pressures are providing us as a nation the opportunity to take clear and decisive action now, based on the recommendations of the many past reviews of the system and reflected in the National Biosecurity Strategy. As an independent, not-for-profit organisation and a trusted technical expert, Animal Health Australia is uniquely placed to bring together governments, peak industry bodies, service providers and other key stakeholders to collectively make decisions on how we will tackle exotic disease outbreaks such as foot and mouth disease. Animal Health Australia manages national and world-leading animal health programs that are critical to emergency animal disease activities and preparedness, such as the Emergency Animal Disease Response Agreement, the Australian Veterinary Emergency Plans, or AUSVET plans as they're commonly known, and Australia's FMD Vaccine Bank. We also provide educational and training opportunities and communication services to support and build Australia's biosecurity response capabilities. In the face of a changing and increasingly complex biosecurity landscape, we are experiencing a paradigm shift, a new norm, best described as an all-encompassing pre-response phase, where there is a mustering of the agricultural and related sectors, farmers, transporters, abattoirs, food retailers, governments and more, to ensure that our borders, whether national, state or territory, or on-farm, are secure, and our biosecurity systems are performing to the highest standard. Where the focus is on ensuring that we are doing all that we can to mitigate the risks and close any potential gaps, whether that be in the R&D space, communication, the application of new technology, and most importantly, having the right people in the right place at the right time. Over the past 6 months, Animal Health Australia has been ramping up our member and industry services to meet these growing biosecurity challenges. However, our ability to action every request and thereby strengthen government and industry preparedness and response and improve our national biosecurity system is constrained by budget and resourcing. While we have implemented surge measures funded from corporate reserves and reprioritised other work to keep pace, this is unsustainable without a fundamental reset of Animal Health Australia income base that better reflects the outsized demand for our services in this pre-response environment. With our extensive networks of members and other stakeholders in the biosecurity sector, we are well placed to identify opportunities to enhance, value add and initiate new projects to support biosecurity and emergency preparedness. We have identified gaps and opportunities where we can add value. Notably, biosecurity and emergency animal disease awareness raising and practice change activities, enhanced training programs, both for our members and at the producer level, and the ability to expedite our emergency response plan reviews faster. Additionally, an effective, prepared, responsive and resilient biosecurity system will require sustained long-term strategic funding to address the challenges of this decade. System connectivity, shared responsibility and innovation in science and technology have been identified as key areas for change to transform the biosecurity system on the trajectory required to protect our agricultural sector and our markets. Our future depends on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Plowman. We've all got questions, I think, but I'm going to go to Senator Colbeck first.
Thanks, Chair. So you talked about the resourcing. What sort of scale of requirement?
Are you talking about the system in general, Senator Colbeck, or in terms of Animal Health Australia?
I'm thinking specifically of Animal Health Australia, but systems are a slightly larger exercise in that sense.
Yes.
But you know, particularly your requirements. If you've got any sense of the broader system, you can give us some assessment of that, but particularly your resource requirements.
Well, in preparation for this inquiry, but also in looking at where the services are required across the system with respect to my organisation, we've estimated around another $2 million would be required for us to accelerate training, improve practice change, and I'm not just talking about changing awareness of biosecurity. I actually think we need to move beyond that to practice change on farm and through the supply chain as well. There's things we can be doing around education, training, also in terms of emergency preparedness and reviews, including surveillance and exercises, simulation exercises. If I may, Senator, in terms of the system as a whole, because there's this enduring question, isn't there, that constantly, how much money do we need? You know, it's like, how long is a piece of string? Because I think we'll never have enough funding for the biosecurity system. But I do believe that what we have in place now, we need to increase our investment. If anything, we need to double it, and that includes having new money, and also money from non-government sources. We need different types of investments, whether that's from our retail sectors, from private business, from philanthropic organisations as well. We need to take a different look at this and how we're going to invest, and that really comes down to having a shared responsibility in this.
Well, it comes down to the discussion of perhaps where some of the funding might come from. And I know that the conversations over recent time go to those who are generating the risk, making a contribution to the mitigation or the management of the risk. So a number of conversations over a period of time around imported product, which is what largely brings the risk in. So do you have any thoughts in relation to where those conversations are at, and whether we're at a situation where they've developed to a stage where we're getting close to some sort of sensible resolution?
In terms of risk creators versus
Well, the
risk
models that have been
beneficiaries?
put up for, say, the discussions around import levies, for example, for product coming in, and
so if we were to
there's been a lot of conversations over a number of years now that haven't borne any final fruit, unfortunately. But is there the essence of something workable within that?
Well, I think the National Biosecurity Strategy is a good starting place.
Okay.
And I refer to, we just heard from Margot Andre from Australian Pork Limited, and you've heard from a lot of industry bodies too, about we've got a great strategy now, but really let's not leave it on the shelf. We've got to have the implementation, that plan behind it, and the sustainable funding, long-term funding secured for that. That will enable us to prioritise where we need to best invest, where we need to close gaps, where we can leverage off opportunities. That will provide us with the direction in which we need to go. We will never be able to have zero risk, because as you know, that means no trade, no people. That would be no overseas holidays for Australians as well. So it's about mitigating the risk to the most appropriate level that we can, while we're considering it in a broader, holistic system sense. So agriculture is very dependent on the environment in which it works. As are Australians, the sustainability of our food supply, our food security, the prosperity of our nation is intimately linked to the biosecurity system, through agriculture, through environment, through tourism.
So the work that you're talking about doing in relation to some of the training work, that would be done in conjunction with the sorts of things that were described by Ms Andre? Because they're obviously working pretty heavily in that work.
So we do
around-
offer a lot of training, both to industry in
Okay.
terms of emergency preparedness, and also we work with governments. Sam, did you want to add anything on the training area?
Well, yes, I think our training is quite a wide area, and at the moment there's a lot of focus on getting industries and government representatives ready to participate in the national decision-making committees, the National Management Group and the Consultative Committee, and they operate under EADRA, so that's that emergency framework that has to be stood up very rapidly. So we're putting a lot of effort into making sure people are prepared and ready if one of those committees gets called at short notice. We're also looking at helping industries, say like Margot's APL, they have to have people on a list to participate in emergency response as well as like a conduit between the actual...
Trained to know how to operate within that process.
Yeah, so that they can be a conduit between industry and the actual machinery of the response, which will be mostly government. So we do a lot of work there, but we're also training with biosecurity, and unfortunately at the moment most of it has to be online because we haven't got the resources to get out and do face-to-face workshops as much as we would like. But even working down with producers or producer groups, that might be set up under Landcare or some of the groups that state governments set up with farmers, we go and work with those as well to try and just raise awareness about biosecurity and help people to understand the importance of biosecurity plans on farms. So we sort of cover a really wide area, but we are stretched fairly thin and would love to do more if we could.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Colbeck. I just wanted to go to, I believe from your submission that you're responsible for the vaccine bank, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. I'm a little confused, to be honest, about what we have. What is our bank? Where is it? How do we access it if we need to? So could you just start from scratch? What have we got in the bank? Is it physically stored somewhere? And what steps do we need to take to get access to it if we need it?
Before I hand over to Sam, Animal Health Australia...
And I should have clarified, I'm mainly talking about the foot and mouth
Yes.
disease vaccine. That's the one that's been topical, but thank
Yes,
you.
Senator.
Thank you. Yep.
Animal Health Australia holds a contract, so it's a legally binding contract with the commercial provider. But before we even get to that contract, we have a range of technical...
Who's the contract with, sorry?
Boehringer Ingelheim.
Yeah, Boehringer.
It's the drug company.
So what was the name of it?
Boehringer Ingelheim, international
Boeing
drug
Eagle
company.
They're a UK company, are they?
UK and France based.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yep.
But before we even get to that, we have government and industry, scientific, technical experts around what type of vaccine, what type of strains, etc. So that's all done prior to that. But I'll hand over to Sam, who can take you through step by step. What is the bank? Where is it? And what do we hold? And how can we access it?
Yep, great.
All right, I'll try and keep it brief, but if you want further information, just please ask. But as Kathleen said, we have a contract with Boehringer Ingelheim, who are an international company in human and animal health. They're experts on foot and mouth disease vaccine production. And as Kathleen said, we have a contract with them to supply a certain number of doses of FMD vaccine to Australia should we need it. Under the contract, the item that's actually stored is called vaccine antigen, which is a little bit like the recipe ingredients for making a foot and mouth disease vaccine.
Yep.
The reason that we've decided to go with antigen rather than off-the-shelf vaccine is it gives Australia a lot more flexibility to make sure we get the exact vaccine that we need, depending on when an outbreak happens. I'm not sure if the senators know, but foot and mouth disease has got multiple strains of the virus,
Yep.
and unfortunately there's not one vaccine that covers them all. So we've had this expert advisory panel, which is made up of Australian and international experts that have a look at what's happening in the Asia-Pacific area, what are the most likely strains that could end up in Australia. They do risk assessment and that sort of thing. They then provide advice to Animal Health Australia as to which antigens they think we need to hold, and at the moment I think we've got a range of 9 that are sitting there in the bank in the UK. And I think you might have seen when Dr. Mark Shipp was overseas some time ago, he actually had a photo which he posted on social media. We're standing there right next to the tank that's holding the Australian antigen.
Okay.
So under our
So
contract,
they're our antigens, they're physically
that's
ours.
right. Yes, we
under
own
this
them,
contract. Right.
and they're there and available. If we had an outbreak today, if we rang Boehringer Ingelheim and said we need to activate the vaccine bank, we can have 1 million doses of vaccine, the bespoke one that we order, here in Australia within 7 working days.
Why don't we keep it here? Sorry.
Yeah, you go. That was going to be a follow-up question, so why don't we keep it here, Dr.
There's problems with having the actual vaccine here. It's policy and political issues. It's, I suppose, a little bit related to, say, with the lumpy skin disease, you know, with having live vaccine here, being able to store it, and also whether it might affect our trade status as well. So it has been determined that the most effective method is to have the vaccine offshore. And realistically, if we did have an outbreak of FMD today, it would probably be a week until we were sure where the vaccine needed to be used anyway. So we would order it based on, you know, the information from the ACDP, Australian Centre for Disease Preparedness. They would tell us exactly what type we needed, order it from Boehringer. We'd have it here within 7 days.
I mean, I realise this might be, just on Senator Stell's question, this might be outside your area of expertise, but it seems strange to me we have this argument that we can't have a live vaccine here because we lose market access. Yet isn't the UK designated an FMD-free country and can sell its meat everywhere in the world? And it has the live virus?
I couldn't comment on
Yeah,
that, Senator.
okay.
They have
I
different
understand,
policy.
but it just, to me,
Yes.
seems a bit of an anomaly here. Okay, so we're confident we'd get it in 7... Just take me through, though, that we've got the antigen.
Yes.
And I'm asking these questions from a position of unique ignorance of this process. Do we then, they need to be produced into vaccines, do they?
Yes, and that's part of the
That all
contract.
happens within 1 million vaccines all get produced within the 7-day window.
That's right, and it's shipped. We've actually, because the risk has been so accelerated recently, we've tested all of the arrangements recently. We've
When you
done
say tested, they've actually produced 1 million vaccines?
Oh, no.
Okay.
We've tested our arrangements like a desktop exercise with them to
Yeah.
make sure that everything's in place, right down to contacting the customs agents and everything that are responsible for, you know, clearing the shipment once it gets here. We did actually do an exercise, I think, in 2017 where we had some dummy vaccine made up. We did that in conjunction with the Queensland state government as well. So we had this dummy vaccine made up. It was shipped into Sydney and then it was shipped up to Queensland just to test logistics and cold chain arrangements. So we would like to be doing that again soon. But we've definitely tested, you know, a desktop exercise. Now, I do feel very confident if we had to order it, you know, tomorrow, I'm very confident that the arrangements are in place and we could get it here.
Okay. I mean, it seems remarkably quick to produce 1 million vaccines. I say I'm ignorant of these processes, but we are confident that can happen. How quickly would they be produced? What's the shipping time in that 7-day period?
Senator, I'd have to get that
You can take
information
on
for
notice.
you.
So how long are we? Obviously, we're doing presumably some project management, scenario planning here. We presumably have a set of time for the transport of the vaccines. I'm also interested in how long they actually take to get produced from the antigen. Well, you can ask that, Senator Colfax.
So how does that line up with the recent provision of, what, I think 1 million doses to Indonesia, which took some time, I think?
Senator,
so
that
how
was-
do those two things line
That was
up?
different. That wasn't utilised under the Australian Vaccine Bank. The Australian government procured commercially available off-the-shelf vaccine for Indonesia. So that was a separate process. What we're talking about for Australia is a bespoke vaccine. It will be manufactured to our specifications.
Good opportunity to test the system, though, is what I was thinking, given that you've got a 7-day cycle as part of your process. Anyway, so thank you.
Just one final question on this. I've got some others, but and then I think Senator White has a question as well. Do we know the, I think, serotypes, is that the right word, of the different strains?
Yes.
Presumably we know the serotypes in Indonesia now?
Yes, we do. Senator, we do know, I'm not sure if that's official or not, like technical experts around the world
I'm
know.
not asking, and it means all Greek to me anyway, but,
Yes.
but we do know what the serotypes
Yes.
are in Indonesia.
And we're very confident that our bank will cover it.
Okay, and
Yes.
so there's nothing more we need to do or should do, you think, to prepare those vaccines for these particular serotypes, or there's enough flexibility to just respond if it gets here?
Senator, I'm very confident that what we've got in the bank will be perfectly suited, if we had an incursion coming in from Indonesia, and that we've also been assured that that's the dominant strain around the world. So even if it did come from China or somewhere
Right, I was
else,
gonna ask that.
we're really confident that it's covered. I guess the only improvement that we could consider would be maybe increasing the number of doses that we've got available in the bank. 1 million sounds like a lot, but it's been estimated by the experts that would last us 3 to 4 months. We do have provision in the contract to reorder, but, if we
So
had
when you say doses, that we don't have the doses now, but the contract is we've got the antigen.
Yes.
And the contract only covers the production of the first million.
That's
if you like,
correct.
guaranteed.
Yes. The
and then
antigen that we've got, it is like a recipe. The amount of antigen we've got is enough to make 1 million doses.
Okay, you need more antigen then. We need to
Yes.
reserve more antigen. Right, okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right, that's very useful. Thank you. Senator White.
Can I just ask you, is the deed, the IADRA, is that voluntary or mandatory?
So the Emergency Animal Disease Response Agreement is a legally binding contract for all the parties that sign. So that includes the Commonwealth, the state and territory governments, I think around 14 livestock or 16 livestock industries that are also signed. So it's an actual contract. I often hear it referred to as a plan, but it is a contract about how we will share the cost of a disease response of those 66 exotic diseases that are listed. It gives the people who share in that cost a seat at the decision-making table around how the response will unfold and the approval of those response plans. Did you
Sure,
want to
so
add something?
I understand what a deed is, like it's far more enforceable than a contract, okay? So I do
One would
understand that. But my question was about whether it is mandatory or voluntary. It's voluntary then,
Well,
isn't it?
yes, we can't compel to
So
sign.
there are groups that are out of it, aren't there?
Well, in order to sign the deed, first you'd have to be an Australian livestock industry body, and there is a process within the deed about who can be signed. The most recent signature, I think, was last year, and that was the Australian duck industry.
So how many livestock organisations do you think are out of it? Or do you know? You would know, I presume, because presumably you're trying to get them
Well,
in.
there's emu farming; they're not in.
You've also got
but
the thoroughbred,
the thoroughbreds.
thoroughbred industry.
Well, the
and
horse
Yes.
sectors
the
are.
trotters.
Yeah, the Australian harness racing, they're a
Yeah,
signatory. But if we talk about the horse sector, I mean, that's a pretty big sector. If we talked about turkeys, they're not a signature, but the other poultry sectors are and industries are. And the turkeys, in terms of you have to look at the industry and how it's organised and structured. So it's
Sure.
very commercially dominated.
Yeah.
And so the Chicken Meat Federation is a signatory, and most of those commercial businesses are actually a signatory through the ACMF.
Okay, so is this model used anywhere else in the world?
No, it's unique to Australia.
Is that unique good or unique?
No,
not
I'd
good?
say it's unique good, Senator. Now, I was very privileged to participate in the negotiations that formed this deed and the goodwill that sat behind that, both from industry and governments. It was an extraordinary time. It had a lot of courageous leadership right through government and industry to make it happen. The deed is one instrument in our tool bag for exotic disease responses. In fact, it's been so good that its framework is used a lot in non-deed responses for just other things. It's been replicated in the plant world, so we have the emergency plant pest deed. So there's also the environmental, national environmental deed as well. So I do believe it's good. It brings governments and industries together in a trusted partnership.
So can I ask you what you see as the differences between state and territory government responsibilities, the federal government, and your organisation in managing the threat or response to an outbreak of FMD?
So the different layers of responsibilities.
Well,
Senator?
how do you see the
Well,
responses
at
between
its
them?
most simplest, I'd suggest that the Commonwealth is responsible for pre-border and at the border. You know, that's our first line of defence. Then the state and territories, they have an important role to play in the management of biosecurity and emergency preparedness, making sure that they also have the capacity and capability to respond to diseases or pests or weeds. And they do that, obviously, not just across livestock, but varroa mite, plants, a number of ensuring that they've got the capability and capacity to respond. And then, of course, you've got industry. Now, whether that's at a state farming organisation level or at the national level, right down to the farmer, making sure that the farm has a biosecurity plan in place. And when I say in place, I mean it's actually implemented, because that's their border. And my own view is that every business in Australia should have, as part of their own business resilience, a biosecurity plan in place. They should know where their inputs are coming from and how it's leaving, that we've got things that have been assessed under their own risk in terms of biosecurity, so that you can have business continuity, business resilience. And I think, we all saw this in COVID. So need to make sure that biosecurity is a foundation of good business practice.
So just on that then, are there any measures or actions you've been calling for prior to the detection in Indonesia to better address the risk of exotic diseases like FMD?
Thank you very much for that question, Senator, because we've been working in this field for a long time. Now, I note that you had Jason Strong, the Managing Director of MLA, yesterday. Yep. Now, I think he said, you just can't set and forget. So I would say that for the last few years, there's been a sense of complacency. We've always been doing the same things in terms of raising awareness, but we've always wanted Animal Health Australia to drive more practice change. We've wanted to get more industries at the table to make sure that they really understand their role and responsibility in this pre-response phase. That if we ever get that exotic disease, we can hit the ground running, because the sooner that we can contain and eradicate, we can get our farmers back to market. So yes, it's been a bit of a frustrating time, and my own view is, let's make the most of what's happened here. Let's make sure that we don't just set and forget. There's been some great initiatives that have occurred. We're starting to look at some really good R&D investment in vaccines such as mRNA. More industries calling for training from us, and we want to provide that training. We want to create that practice change, but as Sam mentioned, we're stretched very, very thin. Did you want to add anything, Sam?
And just can I have one more question? Just in relation to, in your submission you talk about the biosecurity levy. What are your views about how a biosecurity levy could be implemented?
Well, another area that we've noticed for a long time, National Biosecurity talks about shared responsibility, but shared responsibility has been spoken about for quite some time. The EADRA requires specific biosecurity obligations are met by the signatories, whether that's governments or industry. Unfortunately, the current levy system for our industries means that we're asking them to share responsibility and meet their biosecurity obligations, but they don't have the funds in which to do that. We're tying their hands behind their back. It's not because they don't want to, but they don't have the funds. So we can come up with all the best kind of initiatives, training, etc. But unless they've got the funds to actually participate and invest in, they can't make that change. Which is why I think we need to be looking at at different ways in which we can support our industries to meet their biosecurity obligations.
Thanks.
Thanks. I just want to go a bit further. And I hear you loud and clear, Mr. Taylor, and I remember we were nearly voting on a bill in here 18 months ago, and with the greatest respect to my colleagues to my left, who are two very decent gentlemen, the bedwetters in the executive had a flip out because of the cement industry and a couple of miners. I've got that off my chest now, I feel better. So what should we do now? Now let's get serious, because this thing's on our doorstep. You guys and your counterparts have been warning about this sort of stuff, and I've listened to it for many, many years. And as you said, I think you said it's just been yeah, she'll be right, we'll just put another report on the table. Well, she won't be right. And unfortunately, normally when this committee gets involved, it's usually turned to custard. Fortunately, it hasn't this time. So how should we reshape this? What should we do?
Well, I think the way forward for getting others involved means that we have to actually co-design. So one of the things I think reasons, and this is my personal opinion, that the container levy failed is because the consultation and engagement, you have to have people at the table at the beginning to help you co-design. You've got to bring them along with you. I mean, if you look at the great land care model, people were involved at the beginning in the design, and it's still going strong. And we can take those learnings and put them in the biosecurity space. But I think we've had a tendency to design things for people with the best of intent. But I don't think that's going to work in this day and age. And I certainly think in order to expedite and get the action that we need to bring them to the table early, hear their concerns, understand, get their insights, their expertise, their information. I was reading the Hansard report for, I think you had the Transport Association in. They need to
livestock.
Livestock, yes. It's about getting them early to the table. Part of the problem previously is because there was this complacency, everyone was busy, we'll get to it. But at the moment we've got everyone's attention. So let's get them to the table. We know where the risks, the gaps, etc. The National Biosecurity, all the other previous reviews. It's not like we have to discuss it again.
That's right.
Now it's time to design it.
Frightening, isn't it? We have to dare speak to industry. Anyway, look, I just want to go on this. While you were reading the Hansard yesterday, I think it was Nathan, and I apologise to Nathan, I can't remember his surname, from Citrus Australia, I think it was, who was pretty animated. And he did say to us, he mentioned on a couple of times where you guys and Plant Health Australia are at the table, but only as observers on certain work, which the alarm bells used to go off in my head, but nowadays it's just half of the course. What were those working groups or committees or roundtables, or did you read it?
I haven't read the one from yesterday.
Well, that's the main one. That's where you got mentioned.
Oh, no, so I was reading
there,
one
Miss Plowman.
from the hearing in Rockhampton, Senator.
Oh, sorry, we're one day in front of you. This is yesterday in Newcastle.
Yes, I think though he's referring to, we are observers, so in reference to the deed. So the deed has the Consultative Committee on Emergency Animal Diseases in the livestock world and the National Management Group.
Yeah.
Animal Health Australia sits as observers on those two key committees. There are other things at the side there, but we're observers. Our role is to ensure that the interpretation and the application of that deed, and also the financial reporting and all those other things, that, they stay true to the course. Did you want to add something, Sam?
Yes, I'd agree, and I think the term observer is not really appropriate. I mean, we're quite happy that we don't participate in the decision making, but I think we need to have a recognised role to be there to make sure that due process is followed and to provide interpretation on the deed as well, because some of the frustrations we've had, especially with the Japanese encephalitis response as it unfolded, it looked like it was going to go under the deed, and we were all very happy, and then all of a sudden it took a side turn and went off an alternative path. And I think if Animal Health Australia had a more defined role, we could have actually raised some key points at certain times in the discussion that might have changed the outcome of where
He
it
was
went.
being supportive of you guys.
Oh,
It
no,
wasn't
we
a
take
criticism.
that.
Yes.
But in terms of those, it's about making sure that the process is occurring and the framework and people are doing the right thing. We do play a key role in preparing industry. So, for example, in avian influenza, we'll get the industry CEOs, etc., together, and we'll have a talk about, the issues. We'll also talk with the state and territory and the Australian government just to better understand the issues, to make sure that when we get to the meeting, that we can make fast decisions because they're important. And if I might take the opportunity, because I think Senator Colbeck, you were asking APL about Japanese encephalitis and the role, and Margot referred to that, this was a human health. And human
That was
health.
the question I was about to ask you, so you've anticipated my question very nicely, is that...
Well, let me come back to mine, then I'll let you, and then I'll shut up.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. No, keep going.
Human health. There are, zoonotic diseases listed in the Emergency Animal Disease Response Agreement. But I also like to say that the national planning actually accounts for that the ADRA can be used, complementing what's happening in the human health plan. I've forgotten the communicable...
CDNS.
The CDNS. I mightn't have the acronym right, but it's recognised that the two can work together. So it doesn't mean because you've got a human health disease that you can't do something around EADRA.
But that's what he was paying to us, Cyrus Plowman, that, whether it's you or whether it's Plant Health Australia, both entities are the direct voice to the industry. And that's what he was going down that path, saying for crying out loud, they should be more than observers.
Yes.
You should be able to have your voice heard and enacted.
Yes, I think that comes down to some of the process on how some of the meetings are run. And yes, we should be heard at those times, because I think Japanese encephalitis was a good example of that. I would like to encourage our counterparts at Human Health. So I think there was a review done by, it's now called the World Organisation for Animal Health. They did a review in 2017 of some of our system. They made some key recommendations, one of which was that we need to have a national committee of our human health and our agricultural experts. That committee has not been formed, and that is not from the want of requests, the want of trying from the Department of Agriculture. They have really worked hard to get their human health counterparts at the table. Now, I'd say that more than ever, that committee is needed, because we've seen, you only have to think, I think it's around 70% of diseases actually become zoonotic.
You mean pass from... What does zoonotic mean? Does that mean pass from
No, so
animals to humans?
they affect humans.
Yeah.
So diseases like rabies, for example.
Sure.
Yes. Avian influenza, very high strains of avian influenza. But if there's one recommendation I'd love to see from this committee, and that would be one, because we also noted in our review of the Emergency Animal Disease Response Agreement, we're currently doing our 5-year review. It's our big review. We do many annual reviews as well. Now, we've invited them along based on, our experience of Japanese encephalitis to participate in that review to get better informed. We just don't get their participation, and it is disappointing.
Thank you.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Senator Colbeck, I think, had a follow-up.
Yeah, thanks. And I think, despite his anticipation, Senator Still, and I might be in furious agreement with you, and just having seen the operation of the broader public health system up close and personal over the last couple of years, as we all have, but also reading a lot of the current reports around the likelihood that there will be more zoonotic outbreaks. The fact that there are very good systems in place, as you've described today, Ms Andre, before you, that the ADRA for Japanese encephalitis wasn't used, but could have been very effectively used in the outbreak here or incorporated. I think the discussions that you're trying to facilitate and promoting would be extremely valuable in the context of where the broader potential for future outbreaks, pandemic sources might be coming from. Because a lot of good work has, as you've described, been done already in the animal health area that has systems in place already to manage movement or otherwise of these things. So I think I'm just reinforcing what you said a minute ago.
I think
Is that
so,
right?
Senator.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So to those health people out there, I'd encourage them to accept your invitation, or perhaps give you an invitation to come and talk to them. Look, I think that was probably the key point, and something for us as a committee to look at when we come to our recommendations. Is there any, well, I suppose off the back, is there any formal discussion or structure for interactions between animal health and human health systems at this point in time, or is that sort of...
There is the National Antimicrobial Strategy where the Chief Medical Officer and the Australian Chief Veterinary Officer came together and helped develop that. So yes, there are some mechanisms or points in place, but I think we need to have more regular meeting and some formal structure in which we can facilitate more discussions and build understanding, because as you'd understand, Senator, that agricultural practices, you know, it's not as simple as, well, we'll just go and slaughter out all those animals. It's not practical sometimes, it's just not feasible. So we need to better understand how both systems work and how they can work together.
Well, it's important that they do work together, and we saw the interaction of the Biosecurity Act and the utilisation of the Biosecurity Act in the context of human health over the last 2.5 years. So in that sense, there is the base of a system there through the Biosecurity Act, but ensuring that the two systems actually do work together properly, and we're not trying to reinvent the wheel in the sense of some of the interactions is going to be really important.
If I may add to that, Minister Watt formed the task force that did a review of how the emergency management services and the biosecurity system, how those two can come together. And there were some really great learnings from that, because we've got great practices, a great system and frameworks and experts in biosecurity, and we have the same in our emergency management services, a very practiced in natural disasters. But we also know that the complexity of our of the changing landscape for biosecurity, that we will depend on emergency management services to assist us. So having that task force have a look at that federally and on a state and territory level was very, very useful. Why couldn't we do something similar like that for a zoonotic disease with human health?
But if you look at the situation that the pork industry, for example, encountered with Japanese encephalitis, trying to impose a different system of working on them during a time of stress with respect to a disease, when there's already a system that they're used to working with and comfortable working with and know the processes, potentially creates a circumstance for something to go pear-shaped, where if you use the existing system, the one that people are trained in, and they understand the flow, you've got a better chance of actually achieving the outcomes that you're looking to achieve.
Senator Codd, I just add something there in that the beauty of the EADRA is that if it's a disease that's listed under EADRA and we've got the government signatories and the industry signatories, they have a say in the decision making. It's recognised in the processes. When that response went off the deed, it meant the animal industries were in limbo because they didn't have a defined role. So I think they felt very frustrated that they may not have been heard. I think the horse industry, we've kind of forgotten a bit about them. They were impacted as well. And the horse industry were, I wouldn't say neglected, might be too strong a term, but I think they really felt they struggled to be heard. And that's, with the ADRA, one of our slogans about it is if you pay, you have a say. And they do pay to be members of Animal Health Australia and be signatories to EADRA, and they get a say, and it's recognised. There is a process. Of course.
Well, perhaps a message to the horse industry to be a full part of the process, but we've come back to where I thought we would. Senator Steele, we're in furious agreement.
Senator, could I just say, I'd have to remind you that we've got 4 horse signatories and 3 of them are full members. There is one that's not a full member, but there are 3 others that do participate fully.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, Senator Colbeck. We are quite a bit over time now, but this has been very useful. I just wanted to ask one quick question on your submission. You mentioned briefly about new testing technologies. You say that PCR tests have gone from taking days in laboratories now having tests that can take minutes in the field environment. Is there such tests available for FMD?
Not for FMD.
Okay,
Senator.
right.
No.
So that you're referring in that to other...
No, but I think they're the future for us.
Right, okay.
Yes, and I think mRNA vaccines are the future for livestock industries as well, and hopefully that the pilot program that's been brought forward by New South Wales with investment from Queensland and MLA leading with, I think, investment from AWI as well. I'm not sure on that. So I'm got fingers crossed that we're going to see some great things from that pilot project, and that will start our journey with respect to mRNAs, because then we wouldn't need offshore FMD
Yes,
vaccine
that's right.
banks.
Just going back to the testing, though, to me it seems a bit of a key issue for us, because currently my understanding is we have to transport all the swabs to capital city-based PCR testing labs.
Yes.
That's going to cause significant delays in the identification and spread of the virus, as we saw during COVID. What are other prospects for a quicker in-the-field test for FMD? Is there anything on the horizon? Is there anything we should be investing in?
Not to my knowledge, but Sam might know more than me.
I think, Senator, there's potential for those PCR tests to be developed quite quickly, but there are, I guess there's issues about the effectiveness, like how likely is it that you get a false positive or a false negative, and also just some policy things as well, because if those things are in the hands of the general public and people might be posting what they think is a positive on social media and it hasn't been confirmed by experts or whatever, there's some policy issues to work through as well. But there's potential for those to be rolled out, and they're quite inexpensive. It's just a matter of making sure that they're reliable and then working out a way that they can be used in a controlled manner so that they don't actually cause problems for market access or panic, but they assist the response.
Okay. Look, I do think it's a limiting factor, because even during the Yonis outbreak, not that long ago, nowhere near as extensive as FMD would be, we had issues with testing bottlenecks and what have you. Okay. All right. If there are no further questions, thank you again for your evidence and your submission. Very informative. We are going to take a break now, so I'll...
Senator, just before you do, I just wanted to mention AusVet Plan, because I've heard it come up quite a lot.
Yes.
So AusVet Plan, it's got many, many manuals embedded in it for different diseases. There's like 66 diseases. And it's actually developed by technical experts drawn from industry and government. And it uses the best information around diseases which have occurred overseas. For the best type of AusVet Plan, to take AusVet Plan to the next stage, what we need to do is invest in modelling around how those diseases, how they acted overseas, what would they do in an Australian environment? So that's a key area for future investment, and money's needed.
Okay. Thank you very much. As I say, we will take a break now, so I will inform everyone that we'll come back at 20 past 11, and I suspend the hearing. So we're going to have a private meeting. You right for a private meeting, Stella? We've got a quick... This hearing of the Senate Rural and Regional Affairs and Transport Committee. I now welcome representatives from the Safe Meat Advisory Group. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, could you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today?
My name is Alan Bloxham, and I'm currently Chairman of Safe Meat Partners.
And Andrew Henderson, the Independent Chair of the Safe Meat Advisory Group.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I believe you have an opening statement you'd wish to table?
Yes, I do.
So all you do is just tell us,
yes,
table?
Yes, absolutely. I'll table this particular opening statement.
No objection from the committee. That is so tabled. Thank you very much for your submission and the obvious work you've been doing in this area over the last few years. I might just kick off before going to other senators. In your submission is really focused around the report you prepared on Australia's traceability system. Could you give us an update on the 5 recommendations you made? Where are they at? Has there been a formal government response or ministerial council response, or are they still being considered, and what's the status?
Thank you, Chair. So we have had ongoing correspondence with both the Commonwealth and jurisdictions through SafeMeet on the progress with regard to the recommendations that SafeMeet put to the National Biosecurity Committee in 2020. There was a working group established, a subsidiary of the National Biosecurity Committee, which was asked to pursue specific aspects of those recommendations with a view over time to report back to the National Biosecurity Committee on progress. That work focused largely on recommendations 1 with regard to the governance and administration arrangements of the integrity system, and recommendation 3 around the rollout of our recommendation of mandated digital or electronic individual identification of sheep and goats. We actually recommended all FMD susceptible livestock species by virtue of the interspecies disease risk. The primary focus being the larger risk profile of the commercial, visually mob-based identified sheep and goat flock in Australia. Since earlier this year, and particularly since the FMD and lumpy skin disease, but particularly FMD detections in Indonesia and its progression south towards us, there's been naturally a renewed sense of priority around those recommendations that have culminated in the decision point made at AGMIN recently to aim to mandate individual electronic sheep and goat identification by 1 January 2025 or thereabouts. As a part of that decision-making process, a co-design initiative has been embarked upon with the Commonwealth, industry and the jurisdictions to progress toward that aim, with a specific focus on sheep and goats, but as in industry we are also trying to ensure that we remain our focus across the breadth of the SafeMeet recommendations as well.
And you just mentioned there you wanted the EID for all livestock. The decision's been for sheep and goats, is it? Yes. That's the current decision? We just heard from Australian Pork Limited, who said they're confident in their mob-based system. Do you have any further comments on that? I mean, obviously you made the recommendation presumably to cover pork or pigs, but where do you think that's at the moment?
Certainly there's been a significant amount of investment and effort gone into the pig pass system from Australian Pork Limited. Their system definitely has been working well for them. In a perfect world, we're of the view that all species would be able to be administered in a harmonious way and as efficiently as possible through a centralised database if possible. We do know that Pig Pass operates on a separate database. Naturally enough, with the technology base of both databases, there may be some interoperability challenges that exist there historically. Better technology might make that seamless transition of information between those two databases easier and more efficient. In an ideal world, though, we'd love to have all FMD susceptible species come under one umbrella, one system, and as we've recommended, one governance.
They claim that the tags are an issue in pigs, like to chew and eat and do stuff to them. Do you think that's a reasonable barrier to an individual-based system?
Look, I think certainly they're best placed to know whether the current tech works for them. And in the past, they've certainly had challenges with it. There's no doubt about that. We'd like to think that as time goes by, the advent of new technologies might facilitate, bespoke solutions for different species where that is a challenge. In particular, draw the committee's attention to a recent rollout of hock straps for goats, miniature earless goats, if you didn't know that was a thing, and dairy goats who also have an issue with chewing and all of that type of stuff. So there are different solutions that we can come up with to enable the same outcome. But perhaps with a slightly different approach.
Do you go to AGMIN? Do you go to the ministerial meetings?
No,
so you've never, even when you produced your report back in 2020, you never went and presented to ministers at the ministerial meetings?
Not to ministers, no. We presented our report to the National Biosecurity Committee.
Who makes up the National Biosecurity Committee?
So the Deputy Secretary of the Commonwealth. Deputy Secretary of the Commonwealth responsible for biosecurity. Is the chair. It's currently co-chaired by Queensland, the Director General, Deputy Director General, responsible for biosecurity at a state level, and then that's replicated around each jurisdiction.
Okay.
So it's purely ag agencies, sorry?
Yes, yeah. So AgMin, AgSoc, National Biosecurity Committee, and then you've got Animal Health Committee and Plant Health Committee.
This seems a little strange to me. I mean, I have never been to AgMin, but other ministerial meetings I've been to, it's quite common to have external parties come in and directly brief ministers. Have you ever yourselves sought to request such attendance, or
not to brief AgMin chair? No, we've been dutifully reporting back into the National Biosecurity.
You're going through your hierarchy.
That's right.
Have you outside those processes requested to meet ministers directly?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had meetings requested of us, briefings requested of us, and naturally enough, we've sought meetings to promote the recommendations and continue to advocate for them to the extent that it's appropriate for SafeMeat to do so. Also, SafeMeat's members, remembering that SafeMeat's membership spans the entirety of the red meat and livestock sector supply chain, its members have made different representations to different ministers at both the state and Commonwealth level over time as well.
So, have you been successful at meeting? Have you met every agricultural minister around the country and brief them on these issues?
It's probably fair to say, leading into 2020 and around that time...
Just since your report, that is, obviously, ministers would have changed, but I'm just saying, since your report, have you had an opportunity to brief a agricultural minister at every jurisdiction level?
Not at every jurisdiction, no. And look, nor have we sought to since that time. We've also tried to remain respectful of different departmental processes. Where it's been appropriate, we've certainly communicated and corresponded with ministers, all ministers. So there's a trail of correspondence to ministers jurisdictionally in the Commonwealth that we've made at different times as a result of the SafeMeat's membership wanting to ensure that momentum could be maintained in terms of the consideration of these recommendations, and that includes the National Biosecurity Committee.
At the Commonwealth level, have you had an opportunity to brief the minister over the last years on the report?
We personally have not at this stage. We have, put a letter into the minister, but obviously he's probably the busiest man in Australia at the moment, coming into storm season.
But this was back in 2020. You haven't since that time?
We did have an opportunity to brief the minister, Minister Littleproud, once or twice, and certainly met at his office on several occasions since 2020.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Senator Chacon.
Thanks, Chair. I do note from the submission, you talk about since 2018, you've put in and worked on a number of these recommendations. It sounds like there's a lot of good work that you've done, but I'm just intrigued to know, like over the last 5 years, all this work, all these recommendations have been put forward to reform and improve our systems, but yet nothing's actually occurred. And I'm sort of just picking up the point that the Chair just asked you. You briefed the previous government, the previous minister. Was there any follow-up since you briefed the minister about these recommendations, or the department for that matter?
There certainly, thanks Senator, there certainly had been follow-up. Progress is another matter.
Very important matter, one might say.
That's right, and we certainly, it would be fair to say, have been frustrated with progress over time. And we understand that COVID has presented a range of challenges for everybody, but we are also of the view that as an industry and a sector, we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. Things like foot and mouth disease aren't going to necessarily respect that we've got challenges elsewhere. We're going to have to make what we've got work where we need it to work. So we've certainly done our best to ensure that both we as SafeMeat, understanding that we're not an organisation as such, we are a partnership, but our members also have done their best to ensure that this has been on the forefront of ministers at a jurisdictional level in the Commonwealth and including the department over that period of time. But certainly there has the progress since FMD's arrival in Indonesia has been substantial.
So you've put these recommendations to the National Biosecurity Committee. Mm-hmm. What's been the feedback since? Have you had any updates since the outbreak in Indonesia?
Yes, absolutely. So we know that the report, the recommendations were received well by the National Biosecurity Committee at that time. I understand that briefings were made up to AgSoc and AgMin, but certainly the imprimatur has come with the increased threat level, as you would probably expect. As I said, we would have preferred to have seen a greater level of priority sooner. However, it is what it is. We have a happy set of problems now with regard to trying to get this done in accordance with AGMIN's decision around rolling out individual sheep and goat EID. But again, our priority remains focused on the interdependency of SafeMeat's recommendations, which are broader than just sheep and goat EID.
Yeah, and look, I take from the submission, really the crux of it is trying to have a national, consistent,
Certainly.
coordinated approach.
Yes.
But when you talk about one system, are you saying the one system for all livestock, or are we still having individualised systems for each commodity, but just coordinated by a national authority or body?
I think history has shown us that different systems between different species are not as effective, particularly in the context of being an export-oriented nation where the weight of production is exported, and so we rely on that system, particularly for market access on a day-to-day basis, as well as biosecurity preparedness and response. So in a perfect world, we have the National Livestock Identification System, which we see could be the nerve centre, if you will, for all species, as we'd recommended FMD-susceptible species. But critically, that governance and administrative arrangements that sit over the top of that are also preferably nationally domiciled, but coordinated consistently across the country, respecting the constitutional issues around jurisdictions' responsibilities.
And look, you mentioned you briefed the previous minister. I'm probably take this on notice, but if you're able to provide the committee when you did brief the minister,
Yeah, we can take that on notice. Yeah.
Were there any outcomes that came out of those discussions that you had with the minister about the work that you've done to date?
Yeah, happy to take that on notice.
Yeah. Just finally, I just want to ask, is there any other systems around the world that you look at and you think, well, maybe we should look at implementing what such countries might do? Is there any, I guess, overseas experiences that you think might be worth bringing to our attention for us to consider as part of our report?
Yeah, Senator, if I could, I think one of the things that we have to recognise that since 2007, when all the state jurisdictions picked up NLIS for cattle and legislated, we had the world's leading traceability system at that point in time. If anything, a number of countries may well have just caught up to us, but our systems as they currently sit, as Andrew pointed out earlier, are just not quite there given the age of the existing systems. And for us to take the next step is vitally important.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ciccone. Can I just ask quickly a couple of other extra questions? I realise we're over time. The report you mentioned, well, particularly your reform recommendations report, is that public?
No. The recommendations themselves have been publicised.
Yeah,
the report itself
is not
public, nor are they.
And you can't provide that to this committee?
We could on notice, but we would provide advice around the public dissemination of those reports.
If you absolutely. You take it on notice and you can liaise with the Secretariat around. If you do submit it to us, it potentially will go public. So we just you need to check with them about that. And also the other reports. There's some reports by the Centre for International Economics that you mentioned. Another one on sheep and goats. I don't know who authored that, an evaluation report. Are they public?
No, so they're supporting bodies of work that fed into the overarching SafeMeat report, but again, could
you take on notice on the same basis on those reports? Thank you. And just finally, the recommendation for a statutory body, I'm presuming that would be a potentially Commonwealth body. How do you see that working and interacting with the state governments given their responsibilities here?
That is currently under consideration, is the best advice I could give. I mean, we recommended that a body of work be commissioned to explore the issues around that because we are no one within SafeMeat's a constitutional law expert. So whilst it was our best understanding that a statutory model would be the most appropriate pathway forward, we did recommend that they commission a body of work. Now that body of work there was a body of work commissioned to explore those options. Currently sits with jurisdictions in the National Biosecurity Committee, provides some guidance around how a model could work.
So they've done reports, have they? The National Biosecurity Committee has prepared a report on the different options for such a body?
That's correct, yes. And the report did offer a wide range of options for the establishment of that first recommendation, and so that's effectively under consideration. We think that there may be more work that might be required to refine that, but certainly there's a lot of work that needs to be done to broker agreement between the jurisdictions and the Commonwealth on exactly how that framework would be established to provide those arrangements that goes beyond our capacity at SafeMeet.
I presume that report's not public either?
No.
And there's been no public consultation process about such a body
I
submissions?
wouldn't say a public consultation process, but there has been consultation with stakeholder engagement. That's right,
Okay,
yes.
okay. Look, finally, just on this body, in the recommendation, you mention that the body could be responsible for extension. What do you mean by that? What type of extension services are you envisaging?
Well, specifically, we recommended the coordination, the nationalised coordination of extension, particularly compliance and enforcement activities, noting that such a body couldn't constitutionally engage in compliance and enforcement activity itself for those reasons. However, the intent there is to coordinate nationally extension activities, education activities, to ensure that what's happening is happening consistently across all jurisdictions, so that the same message is... It's effectively what Integrity Systems Company is doing now, but in a way that's possibly more robust, if you will, making sure that that information is getting out to all of the stakeholder networks across all of the jurisdictions, that goes to consistent national messaging. And that was the intent behind that. Yeah.
Okay, but it wouldn't extend to, excuse the double use of the word, it wouldn't extend to extension services on agriculture generally. It would just purely be focused on the implementation of the NLIS system. Is that?
Well, the implementation, ongoing maintenance of, it's an ongoing job.
Yeah.
So it's not something that we could, and this will be the issue with the sheep and goat ID rollout. A rollout over a time frame is one thing. Ensuring that the system is sustainable, particularly funded sustainably, and that education activities, extension activities, compliance activities are conducted on an ongoing basis is critically important. And there's been some work that CSU's done recently that demonstrates survey work, people's understanding of the NLS and its importance. And even in cattle, there's still a cohort out there that don't necessarily appreciate or understand the value or appreciate the value of the NLIS system. This little button, has in terms of market access.
Yep.
And one of the things we like to say, well, if we export 70% of what we produce, and that's the system that underpins our capacity to export, then that little button is the tip of a much larger iceberg that underpins the value of 70% of everything that walks off your farm.
Yep, well said. And look, I might finish with a quick Dorothy Dixer for you. How important is the NLIS system to a response to an outbreak? If we did get an outbreak of FMD and the NLIS system wasn't working for any reason, how would that limit our response?
Yeah. Senator, if I could, it'd be a severe problem if we couldn't trace all livestock pertaining to that disease incursion. I couldn't put a price on it, but it would, or a cost on it, but it'd be severe.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for your evidence, and thank you again for your submission. We will now move to our next witness, and do apologise for people, but we are behind time. But we are senators, and that's what happens when we talk. I would now welcome representatives from the Australian Dairy Farmers Limited to the table. And do we have someone online? Or?
Yes, we have Rick.
Rick's online. Okay, easy. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, and I welcome you formally from representatives from Australian Dairy Farmers Limited, and I believe we have the President online. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, could you please state your names and the capacity with which you appear? We might start in this room with you, Ms Coombe.
Dr Jo Coombe, I'm the policy lead at Dairy Australia.
And Mr Toohey.
Justin Toohey, I'm the advisor on animal health, welfare and biosecurity to the Australian Dairy Farmers.
Thank you. And online, Mr. Gladagau, is that correct? You're on mute, Mr. Gladagau. Common schoolboy error. Guilty of.
Rick Gladagau, President of Australian Dairy Farmers.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you again for your submission. You have an opportunity to make an opening statement if you wish, and then we'll go to questions.
Yes, thank you. I will make an opening statement. Senator, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Just before you do, sorry, it was my problem. I believe you wanted to table a document that we have in front of us, so I'll just formally accept that. And if there's no objection, that is so tabled. Over to you. Sorry, Mr. Gladagau.
All right, thank you. Yes, so thank you for the opportunity to speak today to ADF submission, which was submission number 56. Australian Dairy Farmers has been in operation for 90 years, and it's been the national policy making and advocacy body representing dairy farmers across the 6 dairying states. It is the longest running agricultural advocacy body in Australia. Biosecurity of our agricultural industry, and in particular dairy farming, is especially important to me, as I am a practicing dairy farmer from the Adelaide Hills. Our family runs 2 dairy farms supplying a small local cheese company, as well as we have a self-replacing beef herd. An incursion of an exotic animal disease, an EAD, has the potential to wipe out our multi-generational family farm. Dairy farmers place biosecurity as one of the most important priorities for the profitability and sustainability of our industry. An incursion of any sort reduces production, disrupts trade, and adversely impacts the mental health of our farmers and stakeholders. Today, ADF would like to recognise the recent significant injections of government funds and resources for biosecurity, particularly since the LSD and FMD incursions in Indonesia occurred. We note DAF's responsiveness to the criticisms and recommendations of the 2 previous Directors General for Biosecurity, in Helen Scott Orr and Rob Delaney. ADF also accepts that the recent incursion of FMD and LSD into Indonesia as an opportunity to stress test our biosecurity system and make improvements in our capacities of leadership, consultation, documentation, communication and general preparedness. We've been found wanting in some areas, although we acknowledge that gains are being made. Globalisation is increasing the rates of movement of both people and goods into Australia from areas where pests and diseases are more widespread. As a consequence, the risk profile to our industry is increasing. And as we have stated publicly, biosecurity is everyone's business, border security is the government's. In support of its submission, ADF wishes to focus on 3 areas during its response to questions from the committee today. Number 1 is governance, and as you've just mentioned, we have tabled a 3-page document that the committee has now received. Number 2 is the industry's future role in and method for funding biosecurity initiatives as its contribution to the shared responsibility. And 3 is the rhetoric versus reality around border checks. I thank you on behalf of ADF for your time today, and I'd like to hand over to my colleagues present in the room to elaborate on these 3 areas.
Thank you, Mr. Gladagau. So do you have further remarks? No? Were you happy for us to go to questions? Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for that. I just wanted to start, I almost sort of where we left off. In your submission, you do talk about governance issues. In fact, I'll go to you raised the issue of SafeMeat's proposal in your submission. You note that there's been little action or outcomes. We just heard from SafeMeat there has been some action since the FMD outbreak. So are you happy now with the progress since you made the submission, or is there still work to do in regards to the recommendations of SafeMeat and the traceability system?
Chair, we'd rather not talk on traceability. I'll leave that to SafeMeat and the experts, but if I can, I'd focus a little on governance. The issue of governance is probably our primary, which relates to the document that we've had tabled. I think over the years there has been quite a bit of improvement in governance and biosecurity activities in Australia, predominantly driven by the governments themselves. And as you'd be aware, the National Biosecurity Committee is a government-related body. It doesn't necessarily have industry involvement. There are invitations to, I think, observer status for Animal Health Australia, Plant Health Australia on NBC, but effectively no industry. So an industry lacks a similar body, overarching body. So really we rely heavily on the leadership of government, which is fine. But if you look at the shared responsibility terminology and thinking that has come out of all those sort of Nairn, Beale, Matthews, Craik reviews in the recent CSIRO report, shared responsibility means exactly that industry wants to be more involved, both in policy making and narrative and in funding. And there's nothing available at the moment that allows for that. This particular model we put forward was actually put to the Beale Review some years ago. As you know, that was 2013. And it was accepted by the Beale group, but not put as part of the recommendations. But I think the concept was embraced. Nothing much has happened in that area, and we think strongly that the government should pursue some sort of a model that sees us all involved. And we put that forward that indicative model there for you to look at. And our request specifically to the government is to implement a more inclusive biosecurity governance mechanism than exists at present.
So just to be clear, the model you're talking about is the one that you've tabled here. This
correct. Yeah.
This diagram in front of us. How, and I don't know if you heard the evidence earlier from SafeMeat Australia, or I presume you're aware of their recommendations for a statutory body to at least oversight the traceability system.
Yeah.
Sounds like your model's more broader than that, though. What's the
broader,
differences between what you're proposing and what SafeMeat recommended?
And indeed, the model that's before you is modelled on the SafeMeat model.
Right.
SafeMeat was constructed in 1998 along with the restructure of the industry. And it's worked very effectively since that time. It's allowed input on food safety matters from a whole range of industries and governments and meat authorities around the country. ADF is a member of SafeMeat, and it works well because it has a lot of...
Can I just clarify there, my ignorance. So SafeMeat, I take some meat products, but it does cover dairy, or are you there sort of through the fact that dairy cattle are ultimately culled too?
Yeah, the latter.
The latter. So it doesn't focus so much on dairy products.
No,
so, okay, go on. Sorry.
Food authorities that cover that. But the functioning of SafeMeat has proved to be very useful over the years to get through a hell of a lot of important initiatives that are focused on the safety of meat. And it's the mechanism through which it goes that seems so successful, and that's the sort of model we put together here. The yellow boxes at the bottom of that particular model are just indicative of the sort of items that particular committees could deal with out of session and progress and bring forward to maybe a biennial meeting of this proposed Biosecurity Council, Consultative Council to resolve. And if in that time there's been no resolution of a particular item, then it can be swung over to the next meeting. But what it means is really the involvement of all governments and all of industry in the decision-making process, and the ownership would flow from that.
And to simplify it for me is I'm taking away the difference between your model and what exists currently is the bodies here, like the National Biosecurity Committee, are made up solely of government officials, or AHA and PHA government bodies, whereas you're recommending a body that is almost a joint cooperation between government and industry.
Right.
Is that a fair representation?
That's a fair representation. Indeed, NBC could be the government's feed into this particular.
Okay.
Model.
You're not recommending though any merger of the government bodies, are you? Like so, AHA and PHA would continue to be separate entities, for example.
Correct.
I know your proposal.
And we've had that debate some years ago about the merging of the boards and industries. I in fact chair the industry forum of animal health, or did until last week, in Australian Animal Health Australia's industry forum. And I know that the 14 industry members of that forum were opposed to the amalgamation of the two boards. So we're very supportive of the two separate PHA-AHA bodies, and indeed neither one of those bodies is a government or an industry body. They represent both. So, and you've heard from AHA today earlier. We have huge respect for AHA and a lot of strong support for it, and we want that to be maintained.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Toohey. I'll go to Senator White. I've got some more questions, but I'll come back if there's time.
What work has your body done with your membership already to manage the risk of FMD?
Thank you, Senator. So I actually work for Dairy Australia, and as a company, we're obviously the RDC. So we've formed a task force essentially within Dairy Australia, but also incorporating the milk processors and other key stakeholders. We've formed an EAD response group that has 6 subgroups that deal with, for example, pre-incursion, post-incursion, pre-farm gate, post-farm gate. And we've basically upped the ante in terms of extension to farmers through a dedicated website on EAD webpage, webinars, which were extremely well supported, and biosecurity workshops that are actually being rolled out through the regional development programs, along with many other resources.
So what are the unique challenges for the dairy industry in managing an outbreak of FMD that are different to other industries?
Milk, yeah. There's a real challenge for dairy in terms of the daily collection or daily milking practices, and maybe collection once every 2 days. So the movement of machinery, movement of tankers between farms. But very importantly as well, the bringing into the dairy bales themselves, the milkers, and taking them out and keeping that separate from tanker movements and other vehicle movements. So obviously we've got some work to do in ensuring there's 100% farmer adoption of a barrier between the cattle and the vehicles. That's the sort of work we look to be doing shortly, like it's happening quite extensively now, but there's a lot more work to do. 65, perhaps more % of farmers in dairy have adopted a written on-farm biosecurity plan and have applied that, and within that plan generally there is this separation issue of cattle from livestock, but that leaves 35%, so we've got some work to do. We know that. This brings us to another point that our President Rick Ladegard just raised about funding. I think probably most organisations who presented to you in this hearing, in this inquiry, have indicated some shortage of resources and funding. We're no exception to that. What's interesting is the sitting dormant is legislation that allows for a levy to be collected straight away, and that's the emergency response levy. It's legislated across virtually all livestock sectors and virtually all plant sectors. And it sits at zero. It's regulated at zero at the moment. And the purpose of the levy, of course, is to repay the federal government in the event of the federal government having to fund the eradication of an incursion, control and eradication. So then we've got a 10-year period during which the industry has to repay the federal government. What we'd like to see as a council, Australian Dairy Farmers, is for that particular emergency response levy to be made positive. And it's our job to convince the dairy farmers themselves that that's a good option, and it's our job to find out what level we put that levy at. But the importance of that would be to help us fund these sorts of initiatives around awareness, get an extension officers out there, work with Dairy Australia to ensure that the on-farm practices are done, to assist perhaps with the adoption, the implementation of certain things like barrier fencing. We need also to work on the tankers coming in and out and other vehicles in and out of the properties and be able to decontaminate at that point. Who has responsibility for that on a daily basis? They're the sorts of things we'd be looking at funding if we can get that levy up. And what we'd like to do is make you aware that we'll be pursuing that over the next 12 months. The Federal Department of Agriculture and DAF has already helping us with the process of that, and we'll continue leaning on DAF to assist us with that. But that's our intention, and we certainly wanted to bring it to your awareness.
So is it can you quickly bring it from zero to something, or does it take...
Yes, we've been advised that it simply requires a regulatory change to the word zero. So while it is intended to be a reactive fund, it can apparently be utilised for proactive measures, provided they're biosecurity related. And so we would see that as essentially a biosecurity levy.
So you're actively pursuing that with the
Correct.
Minister? Thanks.
Thank you, Senator White. I just wanted to ask around specific risk factors for dairy products if there were to be the worst outcome of an FMD outbreak. What is the situation for dairy products and market access in that situation? Is it all milk products, or can you treat a milk product in a certain way that would continue to allow markets to be open?
Markets would essentially close completely if FMD came.
So it doesn't matter if it's pasteurised, homogenised,
Absolutely
butters,
not. And
creams, everything gone.
And the science says that it would be safe if it were
Right.
pasteurised, but
Right.
unfortunately, as soon as we lose our FMD-free status, we would lose all our trade.
So countries just don't recognise that. They just take a risk-averse approach, and that's that.
Yeah.
Okay. In terms of the AusVet plan and the proposed standstill, what would be the situation there? We've heard about livestock being in transit, but as you mentioned earlier, Mr. Toohey, dairy cattle have to continue to be milked and these things. How would that happen in such an environment where there's no movement of animal products? I presume there's no movement of dairy products either. That would
Correct.
be
Yeah.
So what would happen?
Thank you, Chair. So we're actually working through that at the moment with the Animal Health Committee and Technical Reference Group, which sits under the Animal Health Committee, because the manual has not yet been actually endorsed. And we have a matrix for milk movement in the manual. So under permit conditions, technically milk should be able to be moved from certain properties to certain processing plants,
Right.
but it's very complicated and it is on a risk-based approach under the direction of each chief veterinary officer of the
Right.
jurisdiction. So there
When
would be...
you say milk, are you talking raw milk, or is this
Raw milk.
This is raw
Raw
milk,
milk.
right? Okay.
So there would be huge implications. It's highly likely that in a standstill, milk would not be collected from certain premises, whether they were infected or at risk, which leads to an enormous number of implications, not just from the milk supply perspective, but also animal welfare.
Yep.
If you suddenly dry off high-producing cows, it can lead to terrible welfare outcomes. And the environmental issues of trying to dispose of milk.
Well, that was going to be my
on
next.
farm.
Presumably, you could still milk, but then just dispose it. Is that what farmers would do?
but milk
can they
doesn't
do
break-
that, or they?
Sorry, Chair, yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, technically you could, but milk does not break down in the environment. It's a horrendous pollutant. And so you could only get rid of a certain amount of milk
Right.
on a farm. And there's some of the issues we're trying
You're
to work
working through with this situation.
The other thing, Chair, if I could add, is it's safer from a disease transmission perspective to be collecting the milk and taking it to a processing plant
Right.
than to spread it down the paddock.
Yeah. Okay. So that's
And-
why these
yeah.
it's potentially allowable. Right.
And so we have been negotiating with the various state authorities and CVOs to ensure that during the National Livestock Standstill, which is at least for 3 days, if not, it probably could even run out for 2 weeks, that milk can continue to be collected. As we know, the National Livestock Standstill isn't determined nationally. It's actually an aggregation of the various jurisdictions doing standstills. So it's really a jurisdictional responsibility, but we need their approval for that, and for that milk to be collected without the need for a permit. So in other words, if the flag goes up tomorrow, milkers they still know that they can milk their cattle tomorrow without having to get on the phone and get a permit, at least during the standstill.
What are the implications at the retail level? I mean, how much milk volume do we have in the supply chain? I mean, if it's a 3-day standstill and say the worst and there's not much movement of milk at all, will stocks just dry up on the shelves over that period of time?
There are two things. One's about the safety of the milk for human consumption. We know it's not a zoonotic disease, so it's perfectly safe
So
to...
it's just like meat, you can consume it. Yep.
And indeed, it'll be pasteurised as well after the process. The second thing is that, of course, what's going to occur is there's going to be a diversion of milk and milk products from the export market onto the domestic market.
Okay, so that'll increase supply.
So it'll actually increase supply. There may be an initial consumer reaction, and so Fazan's thankfully has some rather good statements on its website to say this is perfectly safe to consume, and the milk price will drop dramatically because of the increased supply, so hopefully we'll see it keep moving.
Even with a standstill, you think there won't be too much of an interruption with the supply?
It'll be a communications extension exercise to the consumer, but yeah, that should be the case.
Okay.
If I could just add, Chair, there is a regional variation, and for example, more than 10% of the milk at times in the southern supply chain is transported up to Queensland.
Yep.
So there could be issues with supply in
States would
certain-
never close their borders to this type of stuff, would they? Never happen.
It's not been known to happen.
Yeah, that would be an issue, yes. Okay. And finally, have you been involved in simulations? We've spoken about that in the last few days. There are some simulations going on at the moment, I believe, in New South Wales at least. Are you involved at industry level with that, and particularly given these issues around the movement of milk products?
We've been involved. There are consistent simulations over the last decade, some small, regional, some desktop, some major. Excise Minotaur was a major one. So yes, we are involved in those, but that's not to say there's no room for more. We really need simulations. In fact, that levy I was talking about earlier on would assist us to participate more and even take some leadership roles in some of those. But as we know, there's been some modelling done, and FMD is most likely to come in through a major capital city, even in southern Australia.
Yeah.
It's not restricted to northern Australia and such, so we need to be on the ready in the dairy producing areas particularly.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your evidence today. Is there any
Sorry,
other-
Chair,
Yeah,
I
you
just
can
make
add.
one more point? Thank you.
You go, Mr. Till.
Okay. Just one other point that we particularly wanted to make was around rhetoric versus reality. And Rick Latigo did introduce this in his opening talk. Just simply that we still get rhetoric. We still get rhetoric back from travellers re-entering Australia. They've been out and come back, and of course it's a rumour. We don't know where we can put scientific evidence to it, but when put to the department that this is occurring, it's sort of saying, another anecdote, we don't need that, everything's in hand. Now, they're not all saying that, but some are, and I think that's doing their reputation some harm. What we'd really like this Senate committee to agree to do would be to instruct some sort of an external audit straight away of how the rumours and anecdotes and rhetoric matches reality. Because if, we're even hearing last week of passengers coming in from Indonesia into Tasmania airports and not being properly checked to the extent that we are being told they're being checked. And of course this week in Bali it's a major reason for people to travel up there and back. So we just need it to be done straight away to make sure we can back up the trust we have in the department with facts and figures.
That's a fair point. You do hear these things. So just to be clear, you're talking about rumours around largely passenger screening?
Largely
or
passengers
packaging
and their
screening, but
luggage,
passenger,
And we also heard, importantly, that there's again another rumour, that there may be a winding back in parcel checking between now and Christmas because of the sheer workload.
That came from the latest DAF update on LSD.
Okay, well there you are. It's more than a rumour. So under the circumstances and without detail around that, it would be pretty ludicrous to wind anything back right now in that regard. Crazy.
That's a fair point. Senator Colbeck, I think, had a final question.
Yeah, look, just one question around your consultative council. We heard earlier today from Pork that when the discussions and the activity was being conducted around pig, what was the pig?
The traceability or no?
No, the whole thing was taken over health and the systems that the ADRA was based on.
The
Japanese encephalitis. Was taken over by health. The systems of the ADRA, which were well understood, weren't utilised, which meant that they weren't as effective within the animal sector. Your system has no interaction with the health system, but it's a broader biosecurity system. It doesn't appear to me, from what I've seen so far, and we'll look further into this, that there's no interaction from the broader, the National Biosecurity Committee and the health system. For that national system, which includes movement of people, as we've just been discussing, but also issues around animals, would there be some wouldn't there be some value in having some cross-pollinisation or some interaction between those two, and how would that fit into your...
Yes, Senator, certainly, absolutely right. One Health is now top of mind for a lot of biosecurity people, operatives, more on the agricultural side than I think possibly the human health side. So we can easily be discarded at times, particularly in, say, Japanese encephalitis experiences. We certainly don't want that to happen if there's an FMD outbreak. We've got systems in place. We've had them in place for 20 years. Documents are ready. Systems are ready to run the show. So we don't want to be sidelined on that. So, but again, it's a One Health issue, and other issues are One Health issues. And this model, you're right, doesn't reflect that. However, it's an indicative model, and I'd like the sort of evolution of a discussion, if we were to do it around this model, to start to introduce that One Health concept. It's very important.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Colbeck. Thanks again for your evidence this afternoon now.
Chair, I think Senator Whish-Wilson might have a...
Oh, did he? Oh, sorry.
clarifying question.
Okay, sorry. I missed that message. Senator Whish-Wilson, are you there?
Yes,
No,
I am.
I haven't dismissed them, so go for it.
Yeah, look, I just heard the gentleman mention Tasmanian airports. He's heard information about lack of security screening. Look, I'm not aware if there's any direct international flights into Tassie anymore. I don't think so. Senator Colbeck might know differently. But I know that certainly all the flights that I've been coming into Tasmania on, they have been checking people getting off the flights, asking if they've been to Bali. Could the witness expand on what they've heard?
I'd share your experience, Senator Whish-Wilson, too.
Yeah, thanks, Senator.
I think they've been pretty good.
Yeah, okay. It was a wayward reference, and again, this is what happens with anecdotes and rumours.
Yeah.
And indeed, I'm victim to it. But I suppose the real point of the comment was around getting some objectivity to back up statements made about what's been implemented and the effectiveness of those tools that have been implemented. Certainly, we do hear of passengers coming to mainland that might get a quick check, but sort of walk up and say, "Well, look, I've been to a farm, and would you want to check my shoes?" "No, you're fine. Go through." The response to that sometimes is, "Well, if you're aware of that as a passenger, then clearly you're aware that you're doing the right thing in terms of biosecurity anyway. So go through." But so it's, I suppose, just about trying to match with scientific background or some rigor, I should say, the statements that are made about what's being applied at airports.
Well, thank you, Senator Whish-Wilson. I don't think there's any follow-up, but so thank you very much to you all again. We very much appreciate your contributions. I don't think there are any questions on notice, but if there were, we're asking for those back on the 1st of November 2020, by the 1st of November 2022. Thank you very much. So we will move to our final witness today, the National Farmers Federation. Ready to go?
Afternoon.
Cool. G'day, Tony. Okay, so I now welcome representatives from the National Farmers Federation. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, could you please state your names and the capacity in which you appear today?
Tony Marr, Chief Executive, National Farmers Federation.
Chris Young, General Manager of Rural Affairs, National Farmers Federation.
Thank you to you both. Thank you for your submission. You do have the opportunity to make an opening statement if you wish, and then we'll go to questions.
Thank you, Chair. I'll make a quick as possible opening statement and then happy to take questions. Australia's biosecurity system is fundamental to the success of the agriculture industry, the health of our natural environment and to our society and economy at large. Our vision for a $100 billion industry by 2030 is heavily reliant on Australia maintaining a favourable biosecurity status amid increasing pest and disease pressure on our borders. An innovative, adequately funded and well-resourced system underpinned by the correct policy settings will be absolutely essential component of industry achieving our industry goal. At the NFF, we're strong believers in a shared responsibility when it comes to biosecurity. It's not the responsibility of one single stakeholder, government at all levels, industry, both agricultural and otherwise, risk creators, system beneficiaries, including the public, travellers, community at large. Everyone has a role to play. Australia has a sophisticated biosecurity system which is operated by dedicated professionals, and this has kept us free of many of the pests and diseases that are prevalent around the world, and we are in some ways the envy of many countries in terms of our pest and disease status. However, the system in our view is under pressure, with Australia facing an increasingly complex biosecurity environment. As our submission outlines, we welcome the release of the biosecurity strategy initiated by the previous Agriculture Minister, Minister Littleproud, under the previous government. We view this strategy as a critical milestone in demonstrating the central role of biosecurity and providing a vision and a framework for the future. We encourage the committee to consider the role of this strategy and outline priority areas to enhance our preparedness for a biosecurity system. The NFF and the sector more broadly has consistently advocated for an increased sustainability in regards to funding and investment required to support our system. Multiple reviews have supported that view. Given this, the NFF in recent years has also welcomed budget announcements providing additional Commonwealth funding for biosecurity activities. Such appropriations have been vitally important in supporting both disease or incursion-specific activities as well as other non-regulatory measures. In addition to outlining the case for increasing the sustainable funding, the NFF has identified other areas critical to ensuring preparedness, including the important role of industry and regional engagement, research and innovation, and a highly skilled resource workforce. Within this, consistent with the themes identified by the NFF, the immediacy for which information was being sought, the significant number of people seeking information around emergency animal diseases and the role in which receiving this information plays in a timely manner played an increasingly important role in providing confidence to the industry in relation to FMD and LSD. Along with daily efforts, NFF and other industry associations have supported communication requests. We've taken part in numerous working groups and industry communication forums to provide information to farmers and producers in the supply chain on the implications of an emergency animal disease outbreak. Much of this work continues. In closing, we acknowledge and welcome the intent of this inquiry as being able to identify means through which to review and enhance our preparedness. In doing so, it's critical that the committee recognise existing structures, organisations and response plans that are in place, and where possible, look to enhance and complement those structures for the betterment of the system as a whole.
Thank you, Mr Maher. I'll go to Senator Ciccone first.
Thanks a lot, Chair. Good to see you, Mr Maher.
Senator.
And Mr Young. Just want to kick off, and thanks for your opening statement there. How would you characterise the current government's response to the recent outbreaks that we've had to experience over the last 6 months?
It's been collaborative. It's been effective in terms of some immediate responses. We, along with the other industry groups, have felt there is a partnership, as I outlined. It's our view that there is no one organisation or sector that's responsible for this. It does have to be a public awareness campaign. The community have a role to play, industry has a role to play, but government have a role to play. We are confident that the measures have been put in place in a timely way. We still don't have FMD or LSD in this country, so that provides some reassurance to the system that's been put in place by this government.
And what's your assessment of the Federal Biosecurities Agency's ability to manage such threats?
Well, you'd be familiar, Senator, with a recent report that was done on the preparedness for an exotic animal disease outbreak, and that report came back to say that the system is, I might be paraphrasing here, but strong and secure, which we are really pleased to see. we are big, strong supporters of the biosecurity system that is in place, has been in place for decades here. As I've said, it has underpinned an $80 billion industry in this country. Our view is that we need to keep working on that because we know from government advice that the threats and risks facing the biosecurity status of this country are increasing.
Yeah, indeed. And I guess in terms of collaboration, what type of engagement have you had with the current Minister for Agriculture with respect to the FMD, lumpy skin and the other outbreaks in the last 6 months?
It's been comprehensive. A number of examples. The NFF President travelled with the Agriculture Minister to Indonesia early days of the outbreak, and that was a clear demonstration of the partnership between industry and government, which we think is absolutely critical. Further to that, there's been ongoing conversations with the Minister, with government across a number of agencies, attendance at forums, briefings, webinars and things like that. So it's been comprehensive.
And I note, not just from your submission, but obviously comments that you and the President, Fiona Simpson, have made calling on governments of both persuasions for that long-term sustainable funding for biosecurity in this country. I was hoping you might be able to share some of your views about how such a levy could be implemented and if there are other funding models that you'd also like us to consider as part of our report.
So what we've done is to advocate for a longer-term sustainable funding source. We absolutely recognise that governments up until now of all persuasions have committed to biosecurity measures and resources, and they're very welcome. Our proposition around a long-term sustainable funding is that we move beyond budget allocations from year to year or forward estimates, that we have a sustainable source. And there was a proposal with the previous government for a container levy as an example, and we were very much supportive of that. So it's those sorts of things that we want to work with government and take advice from government on what is the best measure. The principle is a sustainable, reliable funding source that can go to addressing what we see as increasing risk and threats. I don't know if there's anything else from you, Chris.
I think I'd simply emphasise it's that cost recovered component of the quantum of biosecurity funding that such a model as the container levy would help increase, and in doing so, as Mr Maher outlined, increase the proportion as opposed to the appropriations which are on their relevant time cycles.
Do you have a view of who should pay for that levy? Like all containers or certain imports, exports?
So a couple of principles which we'd put forward is that the risk creators need to take a lead role in this. Any funding should be directed at the risk and targeted to the highest risk. We do think that there is a role for industry, but broader than that, there is a role for the beneficiaries, the broader community. A good, strong, reliable, robust biosecurity system has a public benefit, a clear public benefit, and that we do think that the community has a willingness but also a responsibility to maintain that biosecurity status.
And might I just add, in terms of that principle at the point of risk creation, we know that the investment return at that point as well is the greatest. It's often referred to as a one-to-one return. So that feeds in then to that principle as well.
Why do you think previous attempts to institute a levy failed?
I think, to be honest, Senator, there was some detail around how it might be operationalised and perhaps more discussion on the direction of the funding towards the risk creator rather than any funding going into consolidated revenue. So more identification of the risks, what funding was going to be directed towards those risks and who would pay.
But it's fair to say we'd be much better equipped today dealing with these current issues if a levy that you described would have been instituted, say, 6, 12, 18 months ago?
It's our view that the industry would benefit from a long-term sustainable funding model.
I mean, going forward over the next 6 to 12 months, where do you see as the next risks that governments need to concentrate its efforts for the industry?
It's obviously around some of the immediate threats like foot and mouth disease, but particularly lumpy skin disease as well. We know that the emphasis has perhaps been placed on foot and mouth disease, probably rightly so. However, there are other ranges of disease like lumpy skin. We've seen the varroa mite incursion in New South Wales. We need to highlight those priority incursions and make sure that we're equipped to manage those. The big risk, I suppose, Senator, that we see is that we have multiple incursions at one time, and we think the system would struggle responding to multiple incursions.
And when you say the system, not just the Commonwealth, but the state jurisdictions
Absolutely.
as well. And I think particularly that's probably where a lot of the concerns have been raised of recent times of states not investing enough in the resources of their biosecurity systems. Is that a fair comment?
I think that would be a fair comment, and our fear is that the roles and responsibilities from a Commonwealth, state, even local, but industry as well, roles and responsibilities aren't clear enough, and the resources that are required, and varroa mite incursion in New South Wales has demonstrated this. It's been a significant drawdown on the resources. Now, if, worst case scenario, we were to get a foot and mouth disease or a lumpy skin disease or Japanese encephalitis, African swine fever all at one time, our view is that the system would struggle significantly.
And I don't know if you heard the evidence from earlier today, and I mean, there's been a lot of discussion around maybe a much more coordinated approach, maybe establishing a national body to manage our biosecurity threats, but with the states and Commonwealth all working together, including all the different commodity groups. Is that something that the NFF is supportive of?
Absolutely. That coordinated, consistent, collaborative approach is what we think is desperately needed. It's there in parts. We think that the states have responsibility, Commonwealth, industry, but now I think we've, particularly in the last couple of years with border closures and things, the opportunity to make sure that we are prepared should a disease outbreak occur is a really good one to take advantage of.
Yeah, because I guess the last thing we want to be able to do is shutting borders down, because I know that's, I think, a position that the NFF was against closing the borders.
That's right.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'll just add on that, Senator, if I may, in the biosecurity strategy, that national coordination was identified as a key area in the national biosecurity strategy.
Okay, yeah. Okay, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Ciccone, I might just pick up where you left off there in terms of the governance and proposals for a coordinating body. Specifically, just wanted to know if you had a view on the SafeMeat Council's proposal for a statutory authority to manage the NLIS database. Does the NFF have a view on those recommendations?
No, we don't on the specific SafeMeat recommendation. I'll point in our submission, you may have seen the reference to the increased industry engagement. Similar to my colleague from the dairy industry previously, particularly at that policy level, models around there, and the NFF previously has proposed, I think, largely similar models to what Mr Toohey provided, which is, I appreciate, separate to your question.
Okay. And in terms of, does the NFF support the other major recommendation from SafeMeat about the rollout of the NLIS system to an individualised basis to the sheep, goat industries?
We're supportive of measures. We understand the implications that I think were outlined by previous witnesses that underpin our export orientation. We're an export-orientated industry. Traceability is increasingly important. So measures that will go towards consolidating traceability, confidence in the system should be supported, should be enhanced. There are some operational issues that we need to bear in mind around, the locality, the type of businesses that are implementing these systems, but the concept of improving the traceability will shore up our export orientation.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just go into a separate part of your submission. You talk about regional engagement and preparedness efforts. Are you involved at all in those those links with other countries? Do you talk to counterpart bodies in Indonesia or other countries about these issues?
Yes, we have. As I said, the NFF president was in Indonesia and met with farm groups and government officials and things with Agriculture Minister Watt. We have, as an industry, established a working group that's looking at trade and protocols on market access. So we're developing up, from a domestic point of view, contingency plans and preparedness efforts to make sure that should anything happen, that we understand what the implications are. And also the various sectors, I would suggest, are talking to their counterparts in other countries, making sure that they know what the steps would be should there be an incursion.
I asked the other day in Rocky, I remember there being a program where we, after the live cattle ban, where we had some sort of, I think, exchanges, if you like, the federal government funded exchanges between the grazing industries in Australia and Indonesia. I'm not sure if you're aware of that or remember that, Mr. Ma. Is that sort of stuff still happening, or could we expand some of our sort of direct links between, I mean, when I say direct, I mean direct exchange of people on the ground in farming communities between the two countries, not just government officials?
Senator, we've found that those sorts of measures incredibly important and incredibly valuable in terms of building relationships industry to industry and understanding respective positions from international countries, our own perspectives. Incredibly valuable for farmers to talk to farmers and get an appreciation of what challenges, what concerns, what opportunities are. So we have taken advantage of those, and we think in this case there is huge opportunity to continue that, because incredibly valuable is what we've found them to be.
I'm going to seek indulgence. The Chair, a bit cheeky with my last question. How would a government commitment to a 2030 methane pledge distract the farming sector's focus on the biosecurity threats in front of us, Mr. Mayor?
Senator, possibly outside the terms of reference for this committee. What we are absolutely focused on maintaining Australia's pest and disease status. So anything the government and Parliament can do in that space, we'd be absolutely supportive of.
Oh, very diplomatic, Mr. Ma. Thank you very much for your evidence. I don't believe there are any more questions, but again, thank you for your submission. That now brings us to the end of this hearing and concludes 3 days of public hearings on the biosecurity inquiry. I'd like to thank all of the witnesses over those. Before I get there, I should say, I don't think any questions were taken on notice, but if you do have any additional information, we're asking that from the 1st of November, by the 1st of November. But again, thank you to all the witnesses over these past 3 days. Thank you to Hansard and Broadcasting, including those that were with us on the road. Thank you to the Secretariat and all senators. The committee now stands adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you, Senators.
Thank you. Thanks, Jerry. Thank you.
Very cheeky of you, Chair.